23 years as a park ranger, and I've never told this story. Not officially, at least. Some things don't belong in incident reports. Some experiences defy the clean lines of our training manuals. But as I approach retirement, I find myself needing to document what happened that autumn in the North Cascades, if only to convince myself it was real. The Skagit Range is unforgiving. 70,000 acres of dense forest, sheer cliff faces, and hidden valleys where the sun barely reaches. Cell reception is a distant memory once you're 5 miles in, and even our radio equipment struggles against the mountain's ancient resistance to modern intrusion. I'd been stationed at Outpost 17 for 8 seasons by then. A simple cabin nestled between towering Douglas firs, built in the 1940s, and renovated just enough to keep the roof from leaking. 2 rooms, a wood stove, shelves of equipment and emergency supplies. The windows faced the trail and the small clearing I'd carved out for official vehicles. Beyond that, wilderness stretched in every direction. That particular September had been unusually quiet. The summer hikers had thinned out, and the winter adventurers hadn't yet arrived. Just me, the constant wind through the canopy, and occasional visits from my supervisor Martin during supply runs. I was reading The Indifferent Stars Above by Daniel James Brown, a historical account of the Donner Party, when the first call came in. A family of 4, 20 miles northeast of my position, hadn't returned to their campsite. The father had radioed in that morning, saying they'd spotted unusual tracks and wanted to investigate. They carried a satellite phone but hadn't responded to calls for 6 hours. Standard procedure. I gathered my pack, equipment, first aid kit. The light was already fading, but I knew that territory well enough to navigate in low light. I'd found lost hikers in worse conditions. What I couldn't have known was that this search would lead me to question everything I understood about these forests and about what might inhabit their deepest regions. I logged my departure in the system, locked the cabin, and headed out. The autumn air carried that specific crispness that precedes winter, and leaves crunched beneath my boots as I followed the main trail before branching off toward the family's last known coordinates. 4 hours in, night had fully descended. My headlamp carved a tunnel through darkness that seemed to press in from all sides. The forest was silent. Too silent. No owls, no rustling of nocturnal creatures. Just the sound of my breathing and footsteps. That's when I first felt it. The sensation of being watched. I've spent most of my adult life in wilderness. I know the feeling of animal eyes tracking movement. Curious deer, cautious bears, the rare mountain lion. This was different. This felt deliberate, intelligent. I stopped, switched off my headlamp, and listened. Nothing. Then, from perhaps half a mile away, wood striking wood. 3 distinct knocks, evenly spaced. A pause. 3 more knocks. My radio crackled. Base to Ranger Thompson. Any sign of the Sullivan family? I nearly jumped out of my skin. The knocking stopped immediately. Negative, I responded, trying to keep my voice steady. Continuing northeast. Will report when I reach their last known position. As I switched my lamp back on, something large moved in the periphery of my vision. Just a shadow, gone before I could turn. But the impression it left was of something tall, far taller than any bear moving on hind legs. I told myself it was exhaustion, tricks of light and shadow, the power of suggestion from those strange knocking sounds. I didn't believe it then. I don't believe it now, because scratched into a tree trunk at eye level, fresh enough that sap still seeped from the marks, was a crude symbol. A vertical line with 3 horizontal branches, like a simplified human figure, but wrong in ways I couldn't articulate. I took a photo with my digital camera and continued walking. The feeling of being watched never left. Dawn broke through the trees as I reached the Sullivan family's campsite. Their tent remained pitched, sleeping bags still inside. Backpacks leaned against a tree, food properly stored in a bear canister. No signs of struggle, no panic. They had simply walked away and not returned. I found their tracks easily enough. 2 adults, 2 children around 10 years old, all wearing hiking boots. They led northwest, following what looked like a game trail, but alongside them were other prints. Large humanoid footprints, easily 18 inches long. In ranger training, they teach us about pareidolia, the tendency to see patterns where none exist. When people claim to see big footprints, it's usually overlapping bear tracks or erosion patterns or hoaxes. I've explained this to countless hikers who come running with evidence. These were different. Perfect toe definition, clear midfoot, obvious arch. Depth consistent with something weighing at least 500 pounds. And they were fresh, from yesterday's soft rain. I photographed them with my camera, placing my own boot beside one for scale. Then I followed both sets of tracks deeper into the forest. 2 miles later, I found the first anomaly. The family's tracks continued forward, but the large prints veered sharply left, up a nearly vertical slope that no human could climb without equipment. The impressions continued straight up, as if whatever made them simply walked up a 75-degree incline. I kept following the family's path. Their stride length increased gradually. They'd started walking faster, then running. The children's tracks sometimes dragged, suggesting the parents were pulling them along. 5 miles from their campsite, I found the father's satellite phone smashed against a rock. Deliberate, not dropped. And nearby, hanging from a branch at about 7 feet high, the mother's jacket, torn along one sleeve. My radio crackled again, making me flinch. Base to Thompson. Status update? I reported finding the campsite and the signs of the family moving quickly through the forest, but hesitated about mentioning the large tracks. Something held me back. If I reported Bigfoot prints, I'd have search and rescue rolling their eyes, thinking I was wasting time on folklore while a family was missing. I'm tracking them northwest from their site. They appear to be moving quickly. Request additional teams to spread out from my position. Copy that. Helicopter will be overhead within 2 hours, weather permitting. Teams deploying from North Access Road. As I put the radio back on my belt, I heard it again. 3 knocks, closer this time. Then from another direction, an answering series of knocks. I froze, straining to listen. A child's voice called out, distant but clear. "Hello? Is someone there?" I shouted back, "Park Service, stay where you are," and broke into a run toward the sound. I found the 2 Sullivan children huddled in a shallow cave formed by fallen trees. The girl, about 12, held her younger brother protectively. Both were dirty, scratched, but largely unharmed. "Where are your parents?" I asked, dropping to a knee beside them. "They told us to hide," the boy whispered, when the tall man came. "What tall man?" I asked, pulling out my first aid kit to check them for injuries. The girl looked past me, into the trees. "The one that's watching us right now." I turned sharply. The forest appeared empty, but the feeling of being observed was overwhelming. I handed the children water and energy bars while trying to raise base camp on the radio. Static answered me. "We need to move," I said, helping them to their feet. "Can you tell me what happened to your parents?" As we began walking south back toward established trails, the girl spoke softly. "Dad saw big footprints yesterday and followed them. Last night something started throwing rocks at our tent. Not hitting it, just around it like it was trying to scare us. Dad grabbed the satellite phone and said we needed to leave. We started walking, but Mom kept saying something was paralleling us through the trees." She paused, grip tightening on her brother's hand. "Then Dad saw it. Really tall, covered in dark hair. He yelled at Mom to take us and run while he tried to call for help. We ran, but it cut through the forest and got ahead of us somehow. Mom pushed us toward that fallen tree and told us to hide and be quiet no matter what we heard. Then she ran in another direction, screaming to draw it away." "When was this?" I asked. "Last night. We heard Mom yelling for a long time, getting farther away. Then nothing." The knocking sounds came again, now from 3 different directions, surrounding us. "We need to move faster," I said, lifting the exhausted boy onto my back. "Keep close to me." We hadn't gone 50 yards when we found the father's backpack hanging from a branch, 12 feet off the ground. The helicopter thundered overhead just as we reached a clearing large enough for visibility. The children and I waved frantically until the pilot acknowledged us with a dip of the nose. Within 20 minutes, a rescue team reached our position, and the children were safely handed off for medical evaluation. "What about our parents?" the girl asked as a medic wrapped a thermal blanket around her shoulders. "We'll find them," I promised. Which was true. I just didn't say in what condition I expected to find them. Search Coordinator Ellis, a 20-year veteran of mountain rescue, pulled me aside as the children were led away. "Thompson, what the hell happened out here? Those kids are talking about a tall man stalking their family." I hesitated. I found unusual tracks following the family's trail, large humanoid prints. Ellis's expression shifted from concern to annoyance. "Bear prints, you mean? Probably a black bear curious about humans in its territory." "These weren't bear tracks," I insisted. "I've been ranging these forests for over 2 decades. I know the difference. And I know traumatized kids can say crazy things, and tired rangers can misinterpret evidence," he countered. "We've got search teams spread across 5 miles. Stick to the facts, not campfire stories." He assigned me to Team 3, continuing the search for the parents along the northwest vector. 4 of us moved through the forest in standard search formation, calling out periodically and listening for responses. Another ranger, Diaz, fell into step beside me. "I heard you found weird footprints," she said quietly. "Like the ones Manning reported last year in Olympic National." I glanced at her. "You believe that report?" She shrugged. "Manning quit after 20 years and moved to Arizona. Never went camping again. Something happened to him out there." We walked in silence for a while before she spoke again. "My grandmother was Snohomish. She called them Stetakai, the forest people. Said they were guardians who became angry when humans disrespected the wilderness. Her own father claimed to have been taken by them as a child and returned days later." "You think that's what happened to the Sullivan parents?" "I don't know. But I know these mountains had names and stories long before we started drawing maps and building ranger stations." As afternoon faded toward evening, we found a man's boot beside a stream, then scraps of torn clothing. The evidence painted a clear picture of someone running desperately through rough terrain. We pushed on as light failed, switching to thermal imaging equipment. That's when we heard the scream. Not quite human, not quite animal. A long, undulating howl that echoed through the valley and sent birds exploding from the canopy. The 4 of us froze, instinctively moving into a defensive circle. "Mountain lion?" suggested Taylor, the youngest ranger on our team. "No way," Diaz whispered. "That was no cat." Our team leader, Parker, raised his radio. "Team 3 to base." We heard an unidentified vocalization approximately half-mile northwest of our position. "Request permission to investigate." "Negative, Team 3. Lights failing. Return to base camp. We resume at dawn." Parker hesitated, looking at us. Standard protocol was clear. Night searches were dangerous and largely ineffective unless there was imminent threat to life. "There could be survivors," I said. "Or we could have 4 more missing persons by morning," Parker countered. "We follow protocol." As we turned back, I saw something move at the edge of my thermal scope's range. A large heat signature, upright, at least 7 feet tall. I raised the scope, but it had vanished between the trees. "Did you see that?" I asked Diaz. She nodded slightly, her expression grim. "Like I said, my grandmother had stories. That night at the base camp, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the Sullivans, possibly still alive, waiting for rescue that was retreating to safety. I remembered the books in my cabin, folk tales collected from indigenous tribes throughout the Pacific Northwest, accounts from early settlers, modern encounter reports. There were patterns across centuries of stories, consistent details that couldn't be coincidence. Shortly after midnight, I made my decision. I gathered emergency supplies, left a note explaining my actions, and slipped away from camp. I was going back out. Protocol be damned. The forest at night is a different world. Familiar landmarks transform, distances stretch, and sounds carry differently through the cool air. I moved silently, using only red-filtered light to preserve my night vision. The Sullivan parents had been missing for over 36 hours now. Exposure alone would be a serious threat, not to mention injuries or whatever had been stalking them. I reached the location where we'd heard the scream and methodically worked outward in expanding circles. An hour in, I found fresh disturbance, broken branches, disturbed earth, signs of something large moving through the underbrush. Following this trail, I discovered what appeared to be a primitive structure deep in a ravine. Tree limbs had been woven between standing trunks, creating a crude shelter about 8 feet tall. Around it, smaller trees had been bent and twisted into patterns that couldn't have occurred naturally. Whatever this was, it hadn't been built by casual hikers or hunters. As I approached cautiously, my light caught something reflective. A woman's watch hanging from a branch, the crystal cracked but still glinting. Mrs. Sullivan's, almost certainly. I drew my sidearm, standard issue for wildlife defense, and moved closer to the structure. The entrance was a low opening requiring me to crouch. The smell hit me first, a powerful musky odor unlike anything I'd encountered before. Not decomposition, thankfully, but deeply animalistic. Inside, my light revealed a dirt floor lined with vegetation. No fire pit, no tools. But pressed into one wall were obvious handprints. Massive handprints with 5 distinct fingers, imprinted into clay-like soil. Something rustled behind me. I spun around, weapon raised. Mrs. Sullivan lay half-conscious in the corner, partially covered with branches and leaves. She was pale, hypothermic, but alive. No obvious injuries beyond scrapes and bruises. "Mrs. Sullivan," I whispered, holstering my weapon and rushing to her side. "I'm with the Park Service. We're going to get you out of here." Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused. "It took David," she mumbled. "Carried him away." "Your husband? When?" "Last night. It brought us here. Kept watching us. Left food, berries, raw fish. Then took him." Her voice was hoarse, barely audible. "It's intelligent. It understood when I cried about my children." I gave her water, wrapped her in my emergency blanket, and tried calling for backup. The radio returned only static. We were too deep in the ravine. "Mrs. Sullivan, can you walk? We need to move to higher ground." She nodded weakly. I helped her to her feet, supporting most of her weight as we made our way out of the structure. The night had grown preternaturally still. No wind, no animal sounds, just our labored breathing as we climbed slowly out of the ravine. A branch snapped loudly behind us. I turned, shining my light between the trees. Nothing visible, but the feeling of being watched had intensified. "It's coming back," Mrs. Sullivan whispered, terror sharpening her voice. "Keep moving," I urged, one step at a time. We'd nearly reached the ridge when 3 distinct knocks echoed through the forest, so close they seemed to surround us. Mrs. Sullivan stumbled, nearly falling. "That's how they communicate," she gasped. "They've been doing that since it took us." "They?" I asked, helping her over a fallen log. "There's more than one." As if in confirmation, answering knocks came from multiple directions. A complex pattern, almost like language. Too coordinated for any known wildlife behavior. We crested the ridge, and I immediately tried the radio again. This time, I got through. "Emergency, this is Ranger Thompson. I've located Mrs. Sullivan alive. We're approximately 3 miles northwest of yesterday's final search position. Subject is ambulatory but requires immediate medical attention. We are being pursued. Repeat, we are being pursued." "Copy that, Thompson," came the response, barely audible through static. "Stay in position. Helicopter deploying with spotlight. ETA 15 minutes. "Negative," I replied. "Cannot remain stationary. We'll move toward clearing at coordinates 48.73 by 121.18, mark with flares." I helped Mrs. Sullivan continue forward, both of us jumping at every sound. The knocking had stopped, but something large was moving parallel to us through the trees. just out of sight but audible as branches swayed and undergrowth crushed beneath heavy steps. "What about David?" Mrs. Sullivan asked, her voice stronger now as adrenaline took effect. "Search teams will keep looking," I assured her, though privately I doubted her husband was still alive. We'd covered perhaps half a mile when something massive stepped onto the path ahead of us. My light caught only a glimpse before it moved, a wall of dark hair, at least 8 feet tall, bipedal. It made no sound as it crossed the trail, but I caught the distinct impression of eyes reflecting my light. Mrs. Sullivan froze, her fingers digging into my arm. "That's not the one that took us," she whispered. "That one was smaller." Before I could process this information, rocks began to hit the ground around us, not thrown directly at us but close enough to create an unmistakable pattern of threat. They were trying to hurt us, I realized, away from the clearing, back toward the ravine. I fired a warning shot into the air, hoping the sound would discourage them. The forest fell silent momentarily, then erupted in response. Howls and screams from multiple sources, a cacophony of inhuman voices communicating what could only be rage. "Run," I told Mrs. Sullivan, pulling her toward the clearing. "Don't stop." We crashed through the underbrush, abandoning stealth for speed. Behind us, I could hear heavy footfalls gaining ground. Something dark moved in my peripheral vision, keeping pace effortlessly. The trees thinned ahead, revealing stars. The clearing. Just 50 more yards. Something caught my pack, yanking me backward with incredible force. I slipped the straps, shoving Mrs. Sullivan forward. "Keep going, signals ahead." I turned, raising my weapon, and found myself face to face with what decades of scientific consensus insists doesn't exist. 8 feet of muscular, hair-covered humanoid. Broad shoulders, massive limbs, a sloped head set directly on those shoulders with no visible neck. And eyes. Deeply intelligent eyes studying me with what I can only describe as calculated assessment. It reached for me with hands larger than dinner plates, fingers splayed. I fired. The shot echoed through the forest. The creature recoiled, not from injury, I'm certain the bullet missed, but from the sound and muzzle flash. It retreated into the darkness, disappearing with improbable silence for something so large. I backed away, keeping my weapon raised, and ran for the clearing. Mrs. Sullivan had reached it already and was waving a flare I'd given her. The red glow illuminated her exhausted but determined face. The helicopter appeared minutes later, spotlight cutting through the forest canopy to find us. As its runners touched down, I looked back toward the tree line. 3 pairs of eyes reflected the aircraft's powerful light, watching, assessing, remembering. We lifted off, Mrs. Sullivan already receiving medical attention from the paramedic on board. Below us, the creatures kept pace with the helicopter for nearly half a mile before the aircraft's speed finally outmatched them. "You saw them too, right?" Mrs. Sullivan asked, clutching my hand with surprising strength. "Tell me I'm not crazy." "I saw them," I confirmed quietly, so only she could hear. "David always wanted to find Bigfoot," she said, tears filling her eyes. "He read every book, followed all the online forums. That's why he followed those tracks. He was so excited." When we landed at the command post, everything became a blur of activity. Mrs. Sullivan was whisked away to a waiting ambulance. I gave a preliminary report, carefully omitting any mention of bipedal creatures or woven structures. Instead, I described finding Mrs. Sullivan disoriented in the forest, likely having wandered in her hypothermic state. I reported hearing large wildlife moving through the area, possibly bears, and rocks falling from ridgelines. Search coordinator Ellis gave me a long look. "Diaz said you took off in the middle of the night against direct orders." "I had a hunch about the ravine system," I replied. "Turns out I was right." "And the pursuit you reported on the radio?" "Wildlife. Bear, probably." Mrs. Sullivan was delirious from exposure. Ella studied me, then nodded slowly. "Get some rest. Full debrief at 800. We're still looking for the husband." I knew they wouldn't find him. 3 days later, the search for David Sullivan was officially classified as a recovery operation rather than a rescue. Teams found scattered personal items, his jacket, one boot, his wallet, but no body. The official report cited animal predation as the probable cause of death, with remains likely scattered by scavengers. Mrs. Sullivan and her children relocated to Colorado after the incident. Before leaving, she visited my cabin. "I told them bears attacked us," she said, sitting stiffly at my small table. "That David sacrificed himself so I could escape. No one would believe the truth." "I know," I replied. "I've been thinking about how long they've been out there. How many missing hikers over the decades might be attributed to them." "They're not just animals," she said with certainty. "The one that took us, it brought food, made sure we had water. When I showed it pictures of my children and cried, it left and returned with the watch I'd given my daughter for her birthday, like it was telling me they were safe. But it still took your husband." Her eyes dropped. "David tried to escape, attacked it with a rock. I think they have territories, rules, consequences for defiance." After she left, I dug out the camera with the footprint photos, only to find the memory card corrupted. My written report mentioned no structures, no handprints in clay, no bipedal creatures tracking us through the forest. Some truths don't belong in official records, but I began researching in earnest. Indigenous legends spanning centuries, early settler accounts, modern encounters documented in obscure journals and online forums, consistent descriptions of behavior, physical characteristics, and communication methods. The wood knocks, the rock throwing, the strategic intelligence. 6 months later, I received a package from a university anthropologist who'd interviewed the Sullivan children. Inside was a child's drawing, tall, hair-covered figures with long arms surrounding a family. One figure was extending what appeared to be berries toward the humans. The note accompanying it read simply, "The children's therapist says this isn't trauma fantasy. What did you really see out there, Ranger Thompson?" I never replied, but I requested permanent assignment to Outpost 17. 5 years have passed since the Sullivan incident. I'm still at Outpost 17, turning down promotions that would take me to more developed areas. My cabin walls are now covered with maps marking disappearances, sightings, and unusual discoveries. String connects similar accounts across decades. The Forest Service thinks I'm eccentric but effective. My rescue success rate is unusually high because I know where to look, and more importantly, where not to look, which ravines to avoid, which ridges are boundaries, the territories I've mapped through careful observation. I leave offerings now, dried fruit, honey, at specific boundary markers. Not as superstition, but acknowledgement. Respectful distance. When hikers go missing, I find them faster by thinking like something that knows these forests better than any human could. 3 nights ago, I awoke to 3 distinct knocks on my cabin wall. Outside, I found fresh tracks in the snow leading to the tree line, and a crudely woven structure of branches and twigs. Examining it in the dawn light, I realized it was a miniature replica of my cabin down to the chimney and porch. A message. Perhaps a warning. Perhaps recognition. That evening, I placed a similar structure at the forest edge, acknowledging receipt of their communication. By morning, it had been taken. I'm retiring next month. My replacement arrives next week for training. I've prepared the official documentation, the patrol routes, the emergency protocols, all the things a ranger needs to know. But there's another set of notes hidden beneath a loose floorboard. Information about territories and boundaries, communication methods, the true meaning of different wood knock patterns, the significance of twisted trees and rock arrangements. Knowledge earned through careful observation and respectful distance. I'll watch my replacement carefully. If they seem ready, if they demonstrate respect for the forest and its secrets, perhaps I'll share what I've learned. Perhaps they too will earn silent guardians who parallel their patrols, occasionally visible at the corner of vision before melting into ancient shadows. Because the truth I've come to understand is this: we've never been alone in these forests. We've never been the only intelligent species walking these mountains. The difference is that they know everything about us, while we've barely acknowledged their existence. They watch. They remember. They communicate across vast distances. They have culture, territories, rules, and they've been here long before us. When hikers vanish without trace, when experienced outdoorsmen report strange encounters, when children draw pictures of tall watchers in the trees, we dismiss it as fantasy or misidentification. We file it away, find rational explanations, move on. But out here, in the deep wilderness where cell phones fail and ancient trees block the sun, rationality has different boundaries. Different truths emerge. I leave my maps and notes for whoever comes next. Whether they believe will be their choice. Whether they're worthy of the knowledge will be for the watchers to decide. As for me, I've purchased a small cabin 50 miles north of here. Not quite civilization, not quite wilderness. A respectful distance. Close enough to hear 3 knocks on my wall when something significant happens in the forest. Close enough to maintain the equilibrium I've helped establish in my small corner of the wilderness. Because I know now what most will never accept. We've been sharing these mountains all along with something ancient and intelligent. Something that watches, remembers, and occasionally, when humans venture too far into places they shouldn't, enforces boundaries older than our written history. They took David Sullivan. They could have taken his entire family. They could have taken me on multiple occasions. But they didn't. There's wisdom in these mountains moving on 2 legs through shadows, watching, waiting, protecting territories we claim to manage but barely understand, and sometimes late at night when the forest falls unnaturally silent, I wonder if they're studying us as intensely as I've studied them, learning our habits, our weaknesses, our capacity for destruction. I wonder what conclusions they've reached. I listen for knocks in the darkness, and I always answer. There's a stillness to these woods that people from the city never quite understand. It's not the absence of sound. It's a presence, something alive and breathing. I've been a ranger at Blackwater National Forest for 15 years, and that stillness still follows me into my dreams. My cabin sits on the edge of the northwestern quadrant, about 30 miles from the nearest town. The Forest Service built it in the 1940s. All sturdy pine logs and simple furnishings. Solar panels and a satellite phone are the only concessions to modernity. Management wanted to install cameras and sensors throughout the park, but I fought against it. Some places should remain untouched by technology's gaze. Tonight, as I write this account by lantern light, the wind pushes against the windows with unusual force. It reminds me of something I read in Stephen King's The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon, about how the wilderness isn't just indifferent to human suffering. Sometimes it seems actively hostile. 3 days ago, I received a call about hikers missing on the Coldwater Trail. A family of 4 had ventured out for a day hike and never returned to their campsite. Standard procedure dictates assembling a search party, but a storm was moving in and backup couldn't arrive until morning. Sometimes waiting isn't an option. I grabbed my pack, emergency supplies, first aid kit, flares, GPS, and my trusty rifle. Not for the wildlife you'd expect. Bears are predictable. Mountain lions keep their distance. It's the other things that concern me. The search and rescue logs in this region contain peculiar details that never make the official reports. Unusual track patterns. Items arranged in geometric formations no animal could create. And the sounds. Low, resonant vocalizations that carry for miles through the valleys. Did you hear that? A hiker once asked me during a rescue. Like something huge walking on 2 legs. I nodded but said nothing. We don't talk about these things officially. But among rangers, the stories persist. As I locked my cabin and headed toward Coldwater Trail, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Not by anything human. The forest was unusually quiet that evening. No birds, no insects. Just silence and the sound of my boots on packed earth. What happened over the next 72 hours changed everything I thought I knew about these woods. About what lives here. About what's possible. The thing about working in wilderness rescue is that everyone expects a happy ending. Find the lost hikers, bring them home, file the paperwork. But as I headed deeper into Blackwater that night, following the beam of my flashlight into the gathering darkness, I knew this would be different. I've seen strange things in these woods over the years. Tracks that shouldn't exist. Tree structures no human could build. And sometimes, just at the edge of my peripheral vision, something large moving between the trees. The locals have a name for it. The old-timers who lived here before the land became federal property. They called it the Watcher. I never gave it much credence. Until now. I picked up the family's trail near Coldwater Creek. Their footprints told a story. Casual walking patterns suddenly transforming into a chaotic scramble. Something had spooked them. Something big. "Hello?" I called out, my voice swallowed by the dense forest. "Forest Service. If you can hear me, respond." Only silence answered. Then faintly I heard it. A low, rumbling vocalization that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Not quite animal, not quite human. The hairs on my neck stood up. In 15 years, I'd never heard anything like it. I quickened my pace, following the family's tracks deeper into the darkness. Whatever had happened to them, whatever had scared them, I was now walking straight toward it. The tracks led me to a small clearing about 4 miles from the trailhead. What I found there defied explanation. The family's belongings, backpacks, water bottles, a child's stuffed animal, arranged in a perfect circle. In the center lay a single boot, adult-sized, caked with mud. No signs of struggle, no blood. Just a deliberate arrangement that no animal or panicked human would create. I documented everything with my camera, though I knew these photos would likely never appear in any official report. Some things get classified or simply lost in the bureaucracy. A user on a forum I frequent, Wilderness Watcher 76, once described finding a similar scene in Olympic National Park. The circle of items wasn't random, they wrote. It was like communication, something trying to use human objects to speak. As I examined the clearing, the feeling of being observed intensified. The forest remained unnaturally quiet, as if holding its breath. I called out again for the missing family, my voice echoing through the trees. No response. I decided to establish a base camp in the clearing. If the family returned, they would come back for their belongings. I set up my tent, built a small fire, and prepared for a long night. Around 2 a.m. I was awakened by heavy footsteps circling my camp. Not the cautious movements of a bear or deer. These were deliberate bipedal steps. The fire had burned low, casting just enough light to see the edge of the clearing. I reached slowly for my rifle, keeping my breathing steady. The footsteps stopped. Then came a sound I'll never forget. A series of wood knocks, rhythmic and intentional. 3 quick taps followed by 2 slow ones. Then silence. After several minutes, I worked up the courage to shine my flashlight toward the sound. The beam caught something moving between 2 massive pines, something large covered in dark hair walking upright. It disappeared before I could process what I'd seen. I spent the remainder of the night with my back against a tree, rifle across my lap, replaying the encounter in my mind. Was it a bear? Impossible. The gait was wrong, the height too great. A human in a suit? Out here, miles from anywhere? Absurd. As dawn broke, I found tracks at the edge of the clearing, 18 inches long, humanoid but not human, pressed deep into the soft earth. Whatever left them was heavy, much heavier than a person. I photographed these too, knowing they'd be dismissed as bear tracks or a hoax. The Forest Service has an unwritten policy about such findings. Document, then forget. Some rangers claim evidence disappears from locked file cabinets. Reports get rewritten. Witnesses transferred to different parks. I've always followed protocol, kept my head down, but finding that family mattered more than institutional silence. With morning light, I discovered a new trail leading away from the clearing. Broken branches and disturbed undergrowth heading northwest, toward the most remote section of the park. The family hadn't left these signs. They were too high up, branches broken 8 feet above the ground. I followed this new trail, moving cautiously, senses heightened. The forest had resumed its normal sounds, birds calling, insects buzzing, as if whatever had silenced them had moved on. After an hour of tracking, I found a child's shoe beside a massive footprint, then another footprint, then another. The trail was becoming clearer, more deliberate, as if whatever made it no longer cared about being followed. By midday, I reached Black Ridge Overlook, a rocky outcropping offering views across the valley. Below me stretched miles of unbroken forest. In the distance, I spotted an anomaly, a structure of some kind, not marked on any map. Too regular to be natural, too crude to be man-made. As I studied it through my binoculars, a movement caught my eye. Something massive emerged from the tree line below the structure, walking upright on 2 legs. It was at least 8 feet tall, covered in dark hair, moving with surprising grace for its size. It turned and looked up, directly at me. Even from hundreds of yards away, I felt its gaze lock onto mine. It raised one enormous arm, pointing deliberately at the structure, then back at me. It wasn't threatening me, it was inviting me. The descent from Black Ridge Overlook took longer than expected. The terrain was treacherous, steep slopes covered in loose shale that shifted underfoot. Twice I nearly lost my footing, saved only by grabbing onto saplings growing between the rocks. By the time I reached level ground, the afternoon sun had begun its descent behind the western mountains. I checked my GPS coordinates and marked my position. If search and rescue came looking, they'd need to know where I'd gone. The structure I'd spotted from above was still a mile away, hidden now by the dense forest. I followed game trails when possible, keeping my orientation by checking moss growth on trees and the position of the sun through breaks in the canopy. As I drew closer, I began finding unusual arrangements in the forest. Stick structures forming complex geometries, rocks stacked in impossible balances. Reminiscent of something I'd read in a Reddit thread, where a backcountry guide described finding similar constructions in remote areas of the Yukon. These weren't random or natural, the guide had written. They showed mathematical precision, understanding of structural integrity. Whatever built them was intelligent. The thread had been deleted within hours of posting. Half a mile from the structure, I found the first clear sign of the missing family. A torn piece of fabric from a blue jacket caught on a thorn bush. Fresh enough to have been left recently. My pace quickened. The forest changed as I approached my destination. The trees grew larger, older, with thick canopies that blocked much of the sunlight. The temperature dropped noticeably. The ground became spongy with centuries of accumulated leaf litter, muffling my footsteps. Then I saw it. The structure. Not a building in any conventional sense, but a complex arrangement of massive logs and branches, woven together and partially covered with vegetation. It resembled a huge nest or den, but with distinct chambers and a central opening that served as an entrance. It stood nearly 15 feet tall and twice as wide, nestled between ancient cedars that seemed to form natural pillars supporting its weight. No human could have built this without heavy equipment, which was impossible to bring this deep into the wilderness. I approached cautiously, rifle ready but not raised. If the family was inside, I didn't want to appear threatening. If something else was inside, well, I doubted the rifle would make much difference. "Hello," I called out, stopping 30 feet from the entrance. "Forest Service, is anyone there?" Silence. Then faintly a child's voice. "Help us." I rushed forward, caution abandoned. The entrance was larger than it had appeared from a distance, easily 8 feet tall, forcing me to stoop only slightly as I entered. Inside, the structure opened into a space larger than my cabin. Filtered light entered through gaps in the woven ceiling. And there, huddled in the far corner on a bed of soft grasses, was the family, mother, father, and 2 children, a boy around 10 and a girl perhaps 7. They were alive, unharmed, terrified. "Thank God," the father said, his voice hoarse. "Are we rescued?" I approached slowly, taking in the surroundings. The interior was surprisingly dry and clean. Various forest materials, pine needles, moss, grasses, had been arranged to create distinct living areas. In one corner sat the family's backpacks, neatly placed but apparently untouched. "Are you all okay?" I asked, kneeling beside them. "Are you hurt?" The mother shook her head. "We're fine. It brings us food, water. It doesn't want to hurt us." I looked at her sharply. "It? What do you mean?" The father glanced nervously toward the entrance. "We were hiking. Got turned around after dark. Then we heard something following us. We ran, but it herded us here like a sheepdog with sheep. It's kept us here since." "What is it?" I asked, though I already knew their answer. The little girl looked up at me with wide eyes. "The forest man," she whispered. The boy nodded vigorously. "It's huge, covered in hair. Walks like a person but isn't a person." I helped them to their feet, doing a quick medical assessment. They were dehydrated despite the water they claimed they'd been given, and hungry, though not starving. No injuries beyond minor scratches and bruises. "We need to move," I said, checking my watch. "We have maybe 3 hours of daylight left. If we hurry, we can reach a ranger station before dark." As I helped them gather their belongings, I noticed markings on the interior walls, crude symbols etched into the wood. Not random scratches, but deliberate patterns that repeated in sequences. "It makes those," the mother said, following my gaze. "It sits there for hours, carving with its fingers." I photographed the symbols quickly. Something about them seemed familiar, though I couldn't place why. We exited the structure into the afternoon light. The family stayed close, jumping at every sound from the forest. I kept them moving at a steady pace, following my GPS back toward established trails. We'd covered perhaps half a mile when we heard it behind us. Heavy footsteps breaking branches moving fast. "Run," I said quietly, then louder. "Run." We crashed through the underbrush, the family ahead of me as I brought up the rear, constantly checking behind us. The father carried the younger child. I helped the boy navigate the difficult terrain. Whatever pursued us was gaining ground, moving through the forest with the ease of something that had lived there for generations. "Don't look back," I instructed them. "Just keep moving." The sounds behind us grew louder, not just footsteps now, but vocalizations. Low, rumbling calls that seemed to come from multiple directions. Were there more than one? A post I'd read on a cryptid forum years ago came back to me. They hunt in family groups. They communicate. They coordinate. At the time, I'd dismissed it as fantasy. Now, hearing those calls echoing through the trees, I wasn't so sure. We reached a small stream and I made a quick decision. "Into the water," I ordered. "Walk downstream, it might mask our scent." The water was knee-deep and ice-cold, numbing our feet as we waded along the rocky bottom. The mother stumbled once, nearly dropping her pack, but the father caught her arm. The children were silent, wide-eyed with fear, but following instructions perfectly. After several hundred yards in the stream, I directed the family up the opposite bank and into a dense thicket of young pines. The close-growing trees would make it difficult for something large to follow. I hoped. "Rest," I whispered, setting down my pack. 5 minutes, not more. They collapsed onto the ground, breathing heavily. I distributed water and energy bars from my supplies, watching their faces in the fading light. The father met my eyes, a question forming. "What are they?" he asked quietly. I hesitated. The indigenous people of this region had stories about forest giants. Every culture does, really. Sasquatch, Bigfoot, Wendigo, different names for similar entities. "Those are myths," the mother said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I've worked these woods for 15 years, I replied. "I've seen things that don't match any known species. Tracks, structures, heard sounds no recognized animal makes. The Forest Service has files." I stopped myself. Official policy was clear on discussing such matters with civilians. "We need to keep moving," I said instead. There's an emergency shelter 4 miles east. We can secure it for the night, radio for evacuation at dawn. As we prepared to move out, the little girl tugged at my sleeve. "It's not bad," she whispered. "The forest man. It gave me berries. It made a doll from grass." Her mother pulled her close. "Emma, don't." "But it's true," the child insisted. "It showed me pictures on the wall, about people from long ago, about others like it that used to live here." I knelt to her level. "What kind of pictures, Emma?" "People hunting them, hurting them. Then the forest man all alone." Her eyes welled with tears. "It's sad. It's the last one." A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with my wet clothes. Before I could question her further, a massive crash sounded from the direction we'd come. Something large was plowing through the undergrowth, heading straight for our position. "Move," I ordered, helping them to their feet. "Stay together." We pushed through the pine thicket, emerging onto a game trail that headed eastward. Perfect. It would allow us to move faster. Too perfect. As we hurried along the path, a terrible suspicion formed in my mind. "Wait," I said suddenly, stopping the group. "This is too convenient." The father looked at me in confusion. "What do you mean?" "This trail. It's leading us exactly where we want to go." I checked my GPS. "Too exactly." As the words left my mouth, a shadow moved across the trail ahead of us. Something stepped out from behind a massive cedar. Something tall, broad-shouldered, covered in dark hair. It stood upright on 2 legs, its face a mixture of human and ape-like features, yet somehow neither. Intelligent eyes regarded us from beneath a heavy brow ridge. The family froze in terror. I raised my rifle instinctively, then slowly lowered it. The creature made no aggressive move. Instead, it raised one massive hand, palm outward, in what seemed a universal gesture. "Stop." Then it pointed deliberately back the way we'd come, toward its structure, and made a series of complex vocalizations, not growls, but something closer to speech. "It wants us to go back," Emma whispered. "It's trying to protect us." "From what?" her brother asked. The answer came with a distant sound that made my blood run cold. Human voices, men calling to each other, and the mechanical growl of ATVs moving through the forest. The creature, I cannot think of it as merely an animal anymore, gestured again with increasing urgency. The sounds of engines and men grew louder. I made a split-second decision. "Follow it," I told the family. The father stared at me in disbelief. "You can't be serious." "Listen," I said, keeping my voice low. "Those aren't Forest Service vehicles. They're not following any established trail. Whoever they are, they're not here officially." As if to confirm my suspicions, we heard a sharp crack, a rifle shot echoing through the trees. The creature turned and moved swiftly into the forest, looking back once to ensure we followed. After a moment's hesitation, the family fell in behind me as I tracked the massive figure through the gathering darkness. It led us on a winding path that avoided open areas, staying within the densest parts of the forest where vehicles couldn't follow. Its knowledge of the terrain was impeccable. Several times it directed us around deadfalls or washouts before we could see them. After nearly an hour of hard travel, we arrived at what appeared to be a sheer rock face covered in vegetation. The creature pulled aside a curtain of vines to reveal a narrow opening, a cave entrance hidden by the natural overgrowth. It motioned for us to enter. I hesitated, then ducked inside, using my flashlight to illuminate the space. The cave extended about 30 feet into the hillside, dry and surprisingly warm. At the back were more of the stick structures we'd seen in the forest, smaller versions arranged like furniture. Crude drawings covered the walls, not just recent markings but imagery that appeared to have been there for decades, perhaps centuries. The family entered cautiously, the children staying close to their parents. The creature came in last, delicately replacing the vine curtain to conceal the entrance. In the beam of my flashlight, I could see it clearly for the first time. It stood at least 8 feet tall, its body proportioned like a human, but more massive, covered in dark brown hair except for its face and palms. The face was the most striking feature, expressive eyes set under a prominent brow, a flat nose, heavy jaw. Not human, yet undeniably humanoid. It regarded us without apparent fear, then moved to the back of the cave where it retrieved something from one of the stick structures. A leather-bound book, weathered and water-stained. It held the book out to me. With trembling hands, I took it and opened the cover. Inside was a Forest Service field journal dated 1976. The handwriting was faded but legible. September 14th, third sighting this month. The specimen appears to be female, approximately 7 in height. Dr. Keller believes they represent a relic population of early hominids, perhaps surviving in isolation since the Pleistocene. Our orders are to document but not interfere. Washington wants complete secrecy until the study is complete. I flipped through more pages, reading entries that documented a years-long study of these creatures, their social structures, communication methods, intelligence. The final entry was dated October 3, 1978. New orders received. Operation Silverback is terminated. All specimens to be removed for study. Team arriving tomorrow with tranquilizers and transport. God forgive us. The next page had been torn out, but blood stained the remaining edge. I looked up at the creature, understanding dawning. They hunted your family, I said softly. You're the last one. It made no sound, but its eyes conveyed what seemed like decades of loneliness and loss. Outside, the mechanical sounds had stopped. Men's voices called back and forth, closer now. Who are they? The mother whispered. I shook my head. I don't know. Government, maybe. Private collectors. There are people who've been trying to prove these creatures exist for decades. Others who want to make sure they're never discovered. What do we do? Asked the father. I thought quickly. They're looking for it, not us. At dawn, I'll get you to the ranger station. Report you found. Simple rescue. Never mention any of this. And him? The little girl asked, looking at the creature without fear. I don't know, I admitted. The creature moved to the wall of the cave, pointing to a series of drawings. They showed humans and his kind together, not fighting but cooperating, hunting together, building shelters, then images of separation, conflict, retreat into the deep forest. It's a history, I realized aloud. Your history with humans. It nodded, then pointed to the children, then back to the drawings of cooperation. You want peace? I said. Coexistence. Another nod. Outside, voices approached the hillside. Flashlight beams played across the vines covering our hiding place. The creature moved to a narrow passage at the back of the cave I hadn't noticed before. It gestured for us to follow, then disappeared into the darkness. We crawled through a tight tunnel that opened into another, larger chamber. This one had a small underground stream running through it and, remarkably, an opening to the night sky above, a natural chimney providing ventilation. The creature pointed upward, then at me, then made a gesture like using a phone. Signal, I realized. I could get reception up there. I climbed the rough stone wall to the opening, about 15 feet up. As I reached the top, my satellite phone picked up a weak signal. Enough for a text message, not a call. I sent a coded emergency alert to my supervisor. Code Silver at Black Ridge. Unauthorized personnel in preserve. Witnesses. It would bring an official response force by morning. When I descended, the creature had arranged pine boughs into sleeping pallets for the family. It offered them dried berries and what looked like strips of smoked fish from a stone cache in the corner. The night passed tensely, with the sounds of the searchers occasionally audible through the cave system. The children eventually fell asleep, exhausted from the ordeal. The parents and I took turns keeping watch alongside the creature, who seemed to need little rest. During my watch, I studied our unlikely protector as it sat motionless, listening to the forest. I thought about the journal, about what had happened here decades ago, about what would happen when morning came. "They'll come for you again," I said quietly. "If they know you exist, they'll never stop." It turned to me with those ancient, intelligent eyes and placed one massive hand over its heart, then reached out to touch my chest gently. The message was clear. Trust. Connection. A choice. Dawn broke with the sound of Forest Service helicopters in the distance. The creature led us back through the tunnel system to a different exit, one that emerged in a dense grove of trees half a mile from where we'd entered. "The ranger station is 3 miles that way," I told the family, pointing east. "Stick to my story. You got lost. I found you. Nothing unusual." "What about you?" the father asked. "I'm staying," I replied, my decision made during the long night. Someone needs to document what's happening here. Someone official. The mother hugged me impulsively. "Be careful." As they prepared to leave, the little girl approached the creature without fear and held out her hand. After a moment's hesitation, it extended one massive finger, which she grasped briefly. "Goodbye, forest man," she said. After the family departed, the creature and I returned to the cave. I used my camera to document everything: the journal, the wall drawings, the structures, evidence of an intelligence that science had refused to acknowledge. I don't know what will happen when my colleagues arrive, whether this revelation will be buried like all the others, or if this time, the truth will finally emerge. What I do know is that these woods hold wonders and secrets beyond what most humans ever imagine. If you're reading this, it means my report made it out. That someone somewhere decided the truth was more important than the secrets we've kept for decades. The creature, no, the being, watches me writing this account. It understands more than it can say. It has survived alone for too long. It is the last of its kind, but perhaps not for much longer. When I first took the job as a ranger at Olympic National Park, they warned me about a lot of things. Sudden weather changes that could strand hikers, the dangers of hypothermia in the temperate rainforest, how to handle encounters with mountain lions or black bears. No one mentioned the possibility of something else watching from the dense undergrowth, something that shouldn't exist. I'd been a ranger for nearly 5 years, mostly working in more heavily trafficked parks like Yosemite and Yellowstone. Olympic was different, over 1 million acres of wilderness, much of it remote and rarely visited. When the posting came up for the North Fork Ranger Station, I jumped at it. The cabin was isolated, positioned along the Quinault River, surrounded by ancient cedars and spruces draped in moss. Perfect for someone like me who needed space after a divorce and too much time spent in crowded visitor centers. "You'll be responsible for the North Quadrant," my supervisor Dale explained during orientation. "It's a lot of ground to cover alone, but mostly maintenance and the occasional search and rescue. The station doesn't get much foot traffic except during peak summer months." "That's fine by me," I said. "I could use the quiet." Dale studied me for a moment, hesitating. "Just keep your radio handy. Cell service is non-existent up there, and take reports seriously, even the strange ones." "Strange how?" He shrugged, suddenly interested in the paperwork in front of him. "Hikers get spooked, claim they see things, probably just bears or their imagination running wild." I thought nothing of it at the time. Every park has its local legends, usually exaggerations meant to frighten campfire audiences or explanations for natural phenomena people don't understand. The cabin was rustic but comfortable. Solar panels for minimal electricity, a wood stove for heat, and a satellite radio for communication. The nearest town was a 2-hour drive. My first week passed in peaceful routine: trail maintenance, cataloging damage from the previous winter's storms, and noting wildlife activity. Then came the first reported disappearance of the season. The call came over the radio on a Tuesday morning. A hiker hadn't returned to his campsite. His wife reported he'd gone for a short hike the previous afternoon and never came back. Search and rescue operations in the Olympics were difficult. The forest was dense, the terrain unforgiving. It wasn't unusual for people to get lost, but time was critical. I grabbed my pack, emergency supplies, and headed out to the coordinates provided. The couple had been camping near a small lake about 4 miles from my cabin. When I arrived, the woman, Sarah, was frantic. "He only went to collect more firewood," she explained, her voice breaking. "He wouldn't have gone far. Mike knows these woods." I jotted notes as she spoke. "Did he take anything with him? Water? A compass?" "Just his phone for pictures and a small pocket knife. He said he'd be back in 20 minutes. I radioed the situation to headquarters and began to search the immediate area. More rangers would arrive later, but for now, it was just me. The forest floor showed no obvious signs of disturbance, but I did find a clear boot print near the edge of their campsite heading northwest. Following the direction, I moved deeper into the forest. The trees grew thicker, blocking most of the sunlight. About half a mile in, I found a water bottle, the same brand Sarah had said they brought. "Mike," I called, pausing to listen for a response. Only the dripping of moisture from the canopy and the distant sound of a woodpecker answered. Then I noticed something strange. A clump of dark hair caught on a low-hanging branch. Too coarse for human hair, too long for a bear. I sealed it in a small evidence bag. As I moved deeper into the forest, the sensation of being watched intensified. I've spent my life in wilderness areas and know the feeling of animal eyes tracking movement. This was different, more focused, more intelligent. I found more footprints, then a disturbing sight. Deep gouges in the bark of several trees about 8 feet off the ground, higher than a bear would mark. The trail of evidence led me to a small clearing where the ground had been disturbed. Signs of a struggle. Broken branches, scuffed earth, and something else. An overwhelming, musky odor that made my nose wrinkle. I knelt to examine what looked like a massive footprint pressed into the soft forest floor. My heart stuttered as I placed my hand beside it for scale. The impression was nearly twice the length of my hand, with 5 distinct toe impressions. As I took photos, a branch snapped somewhere in the forest behind me. I spun around, hand instinctively reaching for my sidearm. Nothing moved, but the silence was absolute. The birds had stopped singing. Even the insects had gone quiet. "Hello?" I called. "Mike, are you there?" From the darkness between the trees came a low, rumbling sound. Not quite a growl, not quite human. I keyed my radio. "Base, this is Ranger Thompson. I've found signs of a possible incident, requesting immediate backup at my coordinates." The radio crackled with static before Dale's voice came through. "Thompson, what kind of incident? Any sign of the missing hiker?" I stared at the massive footprint, unable to voice what I was thinking. "Possible wildlife involvement," I said instead. "I'm continuing to search, but something's not right here." As I ended the transmission, the feeling of being observed intensified. I scanned the tree line, and for just a moment, I caught a glimpse of something large moving in the shadows. Something that stood on 2 legs. The search for Mike expanded with additional rangers arriving the next morning. By then, the strange footprints I'd found had been partially washed away by an overnight rainfall. The hair samples were sent to the lab, though I suspected they'd come back with an inconclusive or unknown canid result, like so many others I'd heard about. Sarah was relocated to a ranger station near the park entrance, while we continued our search. After 3 days with no sign of Mike beyond what I'd initially discovered, the operation shifted from rescue to recovery. "What aren't you telling me about these woods?" I asked Dale when he visited my cabin to review the search grid. He avoided my gaze, focusing instead on the maps spread across the table. "What do you mean?" "Those marks on the trees. The footprint I found. Something unusual is going on here." Dale sighed, finally looking up. "Every ranger who's worked this section eventually reports something unusual. Officially, we document it as wildlife encounters. But unofficially, there's been stories about these woods for centuries. The local tribes have legends about a race of giant beings living in the deepest parts of the forest. They call them stick Indians, or other names depending on the tribe. Bigfoot, I said flatly. Dale winced at the term. I'm not saying that's what it is, but whatever's out there, it's territorial and seems to react when people venture too far into certain areas. I thought about the strange sensation of being watched, the unnatural silence that had fallen in the forest. You could have warned me. Would you have believed me? Or would you have thought I was trying to haze the new ranger with campfire stories? He had a point. I wouldn't have believed him. Keep this between us, Dale continued. The official report will list Mike as a missing hiker, presumed accident. But be careful out there, especially at night. After he left, I couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said. I'd always been scientifically minded, believing only in what could be proven. But I'd also spent enough time in the wilderness to know there were things science hadn't fully explained. That night, I was awakened by a sound outside my cabin. A heavy thump against the wall, followed by what sounded like dragging. I grabbed my flashlight and sidearm, approaching the window cautiously. The forest was pitch black beyond the small radius of my cabin's solar lights. I saw nothing at first, then caught movement at the edge of the tree line. Something large and dark, moving with surprising grace for its size. I stepped outside onto the porch, sweeping my flashlight across the yard. The beam caught a pair of eyes reflecting back, too high off the ground to be a bear or cougar, too large to be any known wildlife in the region. "Hello?" I called, immediately regretting it. The eyes blinked once, then vanished. I heard heavy footfalls retreating into the forest, branches snapping under substantial weight. In the morning, I found 3 dead rabbits arranged in a row on my porch steps. Their necks had been broken cleanly, but they were otherwise untouched, not killed for food. A message, perhaps, or a warning. More disturbing were the tracks in the soft earth around my cabin, the same massive human-like footprints I'd found at the site of Mike's disappearance. I reported the incident to Dale via radio, choosing my words carefully. Something left offerings at my cabin last night, and there are tracks. The radio was silent for a long moment before Dale responded. Document everything, but don't pursue. I'm sending Ranger Martinez to stay with you for a few days. I was grateful for the company, but Martinez's arrival wouldn't be until the following day. I spent the morning photographing the tracks and storing the rabbits in a specimen freezer for later examination. That afternoon, I needed to check on a weather station about 2 miles from the cabin. Despite Dale's warning, I couldn't stay confined by fear. The hike should have been routine. I'd made it several times since my arrival, but today the forest felt different, watchful and alive in a way that raised the hair on my arms. Halfway to the weather station, I found a tree with fresh claw marks, sap still oozing from the gouges. Above them, wedged in a crook about 9 feet up, was a small, bright object. I approached cautiously, circling the tree. When I realized what I was seeing, my blood went cold. It was Mike's phone. Climbing the tree was difficult, but I managed to retrieve it. The screen was cracked, but when I pressed the power button, it miraculously turned on. The battery showed 12% remaining. With trembling fingers, I opened the photo gallery. The most recent image had been taken 4 days ago, around the time Mike disappeared. I tapped it, and my breath caught. The photo was blurry, taken in haste, but it clearly showed a massive, dark figure standing among the trees about 50 yards away. The creature was at least 8 feet tall, covered in dark hair, with unnaturally long arms. I swiped to the next photo, even blurrier, as if taken while running. Just a glimpse of something large moving through the underbrush. The final photo made my heart hammer against my ribs. It showed a close-up of what could only be described as a face. Not quite human, not quite animal. Deep-set eyes beneath a heavy brow ridge, a broad, flattened nose, and a mouth set in what looked like a grimace or snarl. As I stared at the image, a twig snapped in the forest behind me. I whirled around, nearly dropping the phone. Nothing was visible, but I could feel eyes on me. The same sensation I'd experienced the day I found the footprints. "I know you're there," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. From somewhere in the dense undergrowth came a sound that will haunt me forever. A low, rumbling vocalization that started as something like a growl, but modulated into what could almost be described as speech. Not words I could understand, but sounds made with clear intention. I backed away slowly, phone clutched in my hand, and began the fastest walk I could manage back to my cabin without breaking into a run. The entire way, I heard movement paralleling my path through the forest, always just out of sight. Martinez arrived the next morning, a seasoned ranger with 20 years of experience in the Olympics. He listened to my account without surprise, examining the photos on Mike's phone with a grim expression. "I've had 3 encounters myself over the years," he admitted, handing the phone back. "Never this close, though, and they've never left gifts before." "So you believe they exist?" I asked. Martinez shrugged. "I believe in what I've seen. Whether it's an undiscovered primate species or something else, I can't say. But the tribes around here have lived with these stories for thousands of years. They avoid certain valleys and ridges entirely. Why isn't this common knowledge? If there's evidence gets lost, reports get buried. Anyone who pushes too hard finds themselves reassigned or discredited." He gave me a pointed look. "The Park Service doesn't want a Bigfoot circus, with every cryptid hunter and their camera trampling through protected wilderness." It made a twisted kind of sense, though it didn't explain why Dale had assigned me here without warning. That afternoon, we received a radio call from the entrance station. A visitor was requesting to speak with the ranger who'd found Mike's phone. Dr. Eleanor Webb, identifying herself as a primatologist from the University of Washington. "Should we talk to her?" I asked Martinez. "Might as well. She's already got permission to be in the park for her research. Says she's studying Olympic marmot populations." He didn't sound convinced. Dr. Webb arrived at my cabin 2 hours later, a slight woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and intense blue eyes. She carried herself with the confidence of someone comfortable in wilderness settings. "Thank you for meeting with me," she said after introductions. "I understand you've had some unusual experiences recently." "Who told you about the phone?" I asked. "I have contacts in the local police department. They mentioned a missing hiker case with interesting details." She set her backpack down. "I should be upfront with you. My official research focus is small mammals, but I've spent 20 years documenting evidence of non-human hominids in the Pacific Northwest." Martinez and I exchanged glances. "You're a Bigfoot hunter," he said flatly. Dr. Webb winced. "I prefer cryptid primatologist. But yes, essentially. The difference is, I approach this from a scientific perspective. No sensationalism, no television shows, just methodical documentation and analysis." She reached into her pack and removed a thick file. "I've recorded over 30 encounters in this region alone, including several reports from rangers who've since been transferred or left the service." The file contained photographs of footprints similar to those I'd found, hair samples, and detailed witness accounts. Most compelling were several thermal imaging photos showing large, bipedal heat signatures moving through forest environments. "What exactly are you suggesting these creatures are?" I asked. "Most likely a relict population of great apes that evolved alongside humans but remained isolated in remote wilderness regions," she replied. "They're highly intelligent, territorial, and appear to have complex social structures. The indigenous peoples have interacted with them for generations, maintaining a respectful distance." Martinez leaned forward. "And what about the disappearances, like our missing hiker?" Dr. Webb's expression darkened. "That's more complicated. These beings typically avoid humans, but there have been aggressive encounters, particularly when people enter certain areas they consider forbidden. It's rare, but not unprecedented." She turned to me. "You said there were offerings left at your cabin? Dead rabbits?" I nodded. "That's unusual. In my research, such behavior typically indicates either a warning or She hesitated. Or what? I prompted. Or communication. An attempt to establish some form of relationship. The three of us spent the evening reviewing evidence and sharing experiences. Dr. Webb asked permission to set up research equipment near my cabin. Audio recorders, motion-activated cameras, and thermal imaging devices. I can help you understand what you're dealing with, she explained, and possibly help find your missing hiker if he's still alive. Against Martinez's reservations, I agreed. Something told me understanding this phenomenon was the only way to navigate my situation safely. That night, as we prepared for bed, strange calls echoed through the forest surrounding the cabin. Not quite animal, not quite human. A series of whoops and knocks that seemed to come from multiple directions at once. They're curious about us, Dr. Webb said quietly, activating her audio recorder. About why there are suddenly 3 humans in this territory. Martinez checked his sidearm. Let's hope curiosity is all it is. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed with Dr. Webb's arrival. The behavior patterns she described didn't match what I'd experienced. The offerings, the phone deliberately placed where I would find it. It felt more personal than territorial. As I drifted off to sleep, the calls from the forest grew closer. In my half-dreaming state, they almost seemed to form words. A language just beyond my comprehension. I woke abruptly at 3:17 a.m. to the sound of heavy footsteps on my porch. Martinez was already up, his hand signaling me to remain quiet. Dr. Webb sat frozen in her sleeping bag, eyes wide. Something large moved outside the windows, its shadow passing across the glass. The wood of the porch creaked under significant weight. Then came a sound I'll never forget. A series of knocks against the cabin wall. Not random, but rhythmic. 3 quick taps, pause, 2 slow taps. Repeated precisely 3 times. It's trying to communicate, Dr. Webb whispered, her voice trembling with excitement and fear. Before Martinez or I could stop her, she moved to the door and returned the knock pattern. The forest went suddenly, completely silent. Then something struck the door with enough force to rattle the frame. The impact against the door made us all jump. Martinez drew his sidearm, motioning for Dr. Webb to step back. I reached for the rifle I kept mounted above the fireplace, something I'd never thought I'd need to use. Don't, Dr. Webb hissed. If they wanted to break in, they could. That wasn't aggression, it was frustration. That thing nearly took the door off its hinges, Martinez replied. Because we're not understanding. She moved toward the window, keeping low. They're highly intelligent. The knock pattern was deliberate communication. Against my better judgment, I joined her at the window. Outside, the moon had risen, casting silver light across the clearing around my cabin. At first, I saw nothing. Then a massive shadow detached itself from the tree line. The creature stood upright, at least 8 feet tall, its body covered in dark hair. In the moonlight, I could make out broad shoulders, long arms, and a distinctly non-human silhouette. It remained at the edge of the forest, watching the cabin. Dr. Webb fumbled with her thermal camera, capturing images through the window. Remarkable, she whispered. Adult male, judging by the size and shoulder width. The creature raised an arm, clearly visible in the moonlight, and made a sweeping gesture toward the forest. Then it repeated the knock pattern we'd heard earlier, striking a nearby tree with enough force that bark splintered. It wants us to follow, Dr. Webb said. Absolutely not, Martinez responded immediately. I couldn't tear my eyes from the figure. What if it knows something about Mike? Dr. Webb nodded. Indigenous stories often mention these beings taking people, sometimes returning them, if your hiker is still alive. The creature made the gesture again, more emphatically before melting back into the darkness. We stay put until morning, Martinez insisted. Radio for backup. This isn't a National Geographic special, it's a potential threat situation. We maintained watch and shifts through the remainder of the night. By dawn, there had been no further visitations, though the strange call and response vocalizations continued from the surrounding forest, seemingly from multiple sources. At first light, we discovered new offerings on the porch, not dead animals this time. but a collection of objects arranged in a precise line. A rusty pocket knife, a weathered compass, fragments of colored glass, and most disturbingly, a torn piece of fabric that matched the description of Mike's jacket. "These are human objects," Dr. Webb noted, photographing the arrangement. "Things they've collected or taken from people who entered their territory. Or from people they've killed," Martinez added grimly. I picked up the compass with gloved hands. The glass was cracked, but the needle still moved. The manufacturer's mark on the back dated it to the 1970s. "How many disappearances have there been in this section of the park?" I asked. Martinez frowned. "Officially, 2 or 3 per decade. Unofficially, more." Dr. Webb was examining the arrangement. "This isn't random. They're mimicking human behavior they've observed. The straight line, the spacing between objects, it's deliberate." As we discussed the implications, my radio crackled to life. It was Dale. "Thompson, we've got another situation. Family of 4 reported missing from the Cedar Creek campground. They were due to check in at the ranger station yesterday evening." My stomach dropped. Cedar Creek was less than 5 miles from my cabin, in the direction the creature had gestured. "We're forming search teams now," Dale continued. "Can you and Martinez begin checking the trails heading north from the campground?" After acknowledging, I turned to the others. "This changes things." "It could be connected," Dr. Webb agreed. Martinez looked conflicted. "I should report what we've seen." "And say what?" I challenged. "That Bigfoot left us a message? They'll pull us from the search and send in rangers who don't know what they're dealing with." In the end, we reached a compromise. Martinez would join the official search team approaching from the south. Dr. Webb and I would investigate the northern area, following the direction indicated by the creature. We would maintain radio contact hourly. As we prepared our gear, Dr. Webb shared more of her research. "There's a consistent pattern in credible encounters," she explained. "These beings seem to have territories and social structures similar to great apes. They avoid humans generally, but take interest in certain individuals." "Why me?" I asked. She considered the question carefully. "It could be random, or something about you specifically. Your role as a ranger, your behavior, even your scent. They have acute senses, much better than ours." We set out mid-morning, following game trails that led north from the cabin. I carried my service weapon, emergency supplies, and a satellite radio. Dr. Webb brought her research equipment, moving with surprising agility for her age. The forest grew denser as we progressed, the canopy blocking most of the sunlight. About 2 miles in, we began finding signs. Broken branches well above head height, distinctive footprints, and occasional markers that Dr. Webb identified as territorial signposts. Sticks arranged in X patterns or small stones stacked unnaturally. "They're leaving us a trail," she said, excitement evident in her voice. "I've never seen them this interactive before." I was less enthusiastic. "Or they're leading us somewhere isolated." The trail took us deep into one of the most remote sections of the park, an old-growth forest that few hikers ever visited. The trees here were ancient, some predating European contact with North America. Around noon, we reached a small stream cutting through a ravine. As we stopped to refill our water bottles, I noticed something unnatural about a rocky outcropping on the opposite bank, a dark opening that appeared to be a cave entrance. Dr. Webb saw it too. Caves aren't common in this forest environment. As we watched, movement caught my eye. A small figure emerged briefly from the cave opening before ducking back inside. Not an adult like the creature we'd seen at the cabin, but something smaller. "A juvenile," Dr. Webb whispered, raising her camera. "This could be a family group." Before she could capture any images, a sound broke the silence. A human voice, calling weakly for help. I recognized it immediately. "That's a child!" Without hesitation, I splashed across the shallow stream, drawing my sidearm as I approached the cave. Dr. Webb followed close behind, her research forgotten in the moment of crisis. The cave entrance was larger than it had appeared from a distance, tall enough for me to enter without ducking. The interior was surprisingly deep, extending back into darkness. "Hello?" I called. "Park Ranger, is anyone in here?" A small voice answered from the shadows. "Please help us. We can't get out." I switched on my flashlight, illuminating the interior. What I saw left me speechless. The cave opened into a larger chamber where 4 people, 2 adults and 2 children, sat huddled together. The missing family. They appeared physically unharmed, but terrified. More shocking was what surrounded them. The cave walls were covered in crude drawings, handprints, stick figures, and more complex designs. Stone tools and animal bones lay scattered across the floor, along with more modern objects, backpacks, camping equipment, even a rusted bicycle frame. And just visible in a shadowed alcove at the back of the cave was a crouched figure, smaller than the creature we'd seen at the cabin, but unmistakably similar. "They won't let us leave," the father explained hurriedly as we approached. "They haven't hurt us, but they block the entrance whenever we try to go." "How many are there?" I asked, keeping my voice calm while scanning the cave. "At least 3 that we've seen. 2 large ones and the smaller one there." He nodded toward the alcove. Dr. Webb had gone completely still, staring at the juvenile being. "Remarkable," she breathed. "A family unit." "We need to get these people out now," I said firmly. "Radio Martinez and request immediate backup." As Dr. Webb reached for her radio, a low rumbling growl echoed through the cave. The juvenile creature retreated deeper into the alcove. From outside came the sound of heavy movement. "They're coming back," the mother whispered, clutching her children closer. I positioned myself between the family and the cave entrance, weapon ready. "Stay behind me. When I give the word, move quickly toward the stream." The light from the entrance dimmed as something large blocked the opening. I raised my flashlight, illuminating the silhouette of the creature we'd seen at the cabin. Behind it stood another, slightly smaller but still imposing. Dr. Webb stepped forward, ignoring my warning to stay back. "We're not here to harm you," she said clearly, as if the creatures might understand English. "We just want to help these people return home." To my astonishment, the larger creature made a series of gestures, deliberate movements of its hands that seemed almost like sign language. Dr. Webb responded with similar gestures. "Primitive communication," she explained quickly, "based on what indigenous trackers have reported." The standoff continued for several tense minutes, with Dr. Webb attempting to communicate, while I maintained my protective position. Finally, the creatures stepped aside from the entrance, though they remained watchful. "They're letting us go," Dr. Webb said, sounding surprised. "But they want something in return." "What?" I asked. She pointed to Mike's phone, which I'd kept in my pocket. "That, and possibly you." "What do you mean they want me?" I demanded, keeping my voice low. Dr. Webb's expression was both fascinated and concerned. "Not to harm you, I think. They're curious about you specifically. You've entered their territory repeatedly without showing aggression. You've accepted their offerings. In their perception, you've engaged in exchange rituals." The family huddled behind us, the children wide-eyed with fear. "We need to get these people to safety," I insisted. "Whatever these creatures want from me can wait." I handed Mike's phone to Dr. Webb. "Give them this if they'll let us pass. I'll cover our retreat." She took the phone reluctantly. "If I'm right about their intelligence level, they understand more than we think. Breaking faith now could make things worse. We don't have a choice." With careful movements, Dr. Webb approached the cave entrance, holding the phone out. The smaller of the 2 creatures reached for it with surprisingly dexterous fingers, examining it briefly before tucking it away somewhere in its thick fur. The larger one remained focused on me, its deep-set eyes unreadable in the shadows of its face. "Go," I told the family, keeping my weapon pointed downward but ready. "Move slowly toward the stream. Dr. Webb will lead you." As they edged past the creatures, I maintained eye contact with the larger one, trying to project calm authority. The beings made no move to stop the family, though the smaller one emitted a series of low vocalizations that raised the hair on my neck. When everyone was safely outside, I began backing toward the entrance, never turning my back. The larger creature suddenly moved, covering the distance between us with startling speed. Before I could raise my weapon, it reached past me to the cave wall, pressing its massive hand against one of the drawings, a crude depiction of what appeared to be humans and the creatures together. The message seemed clear, even without words. "I'll come back," I said, not knowing if it understood. Alone, after they're safe. Whether by coincidence or comprehension, the creature stepped aside, allowing me to exit. Outside, Dr. Webb had already started leading the family toward the stream. I followed, constantly checking behind us. The creatures emerged from the cave but made no attempt to pursue, watching from the entrance as we crossed the water. "What happened in there?" Dr. Webb asked when we were a safe distance away. "I think I made a promise," I replied. The family, the Hendersons, we learned, told their story as we hiked back toward established trails. They had been setting up camp when they first noticed strange movements in the surrounding forest. After dark, their tent was suddenly torn open, and they found themselves surrounded by the creatures. "They didn't hurt us," Mr. Henderson explained. "They just herded us through the forest to that cave. The children were terrified, but my wife noticed they were especially careful with them." "Did they take anything from your campsite?" Dr. Webb asked. Mrs. Henderson nodded. "Our phones, a camera, some food. They're collecting technology," I realized. "Things that capture images or make sounds." Dr. Webb's eyes lit with understanding. "Of course. They're removing evidence of their existence." We radioed Martinez and the search team, coordinating a rendezvous point. I deliberately avoided mentioning the creatures in my transmission, referring only to the rescued family. As we neared the meeting location, Dr. Webb pulled me aside. "What are you planning to do about your promise?" she asked quietly. I don't know if it even understood me. "It understood," she insisted. "These beings have been evading human documentation for centuries while living alongside us. That requires intelligence. What would you suggest? That I go back alone to a cave with creatures that could tear me apart?" "Yes," she said simply. "That's exactly what I'm suggesting. This could be an unprecedented opportunity for cross-species communication." The idea was absurd, dangerous, and yet I couldn't dismiss it entirely. My encounters had been different from the aggressive territorial behavior described in most Bigfoot accounts. There seemed to be purpose behind their actions. After connecting with the search team and ensuring the Henderson family received medical attention, I pulled Martinez aside to explain the full situation. "You can't seriously be considering this," he said after I outlined Dr. Webb's suggestion. "What if Mike is still alive? What if there are others?" Martinez looked torn. "At least wait for proper backup. We can assemble a team. And what? Tranquilize them? Treat them like animals?" I shook my head. "Dr. Webb believes they're intelligent beings. If I show up with an armed team, any trust will be destroyed." In the end, we compromised. I would return to the cave area the following morning. Martinez and Dr. Webb would observe from a concealed position with communication equipment and weapons if needed. If I didn't return by sundown, they would call in emergency extraction. That night, back at my cabin, the forest was unusually quiet. No vocalizations. No movement detected by Dr. Webb's equipment. It was as if the creatures were waiting. I slept fitfully, dreaming of dark shapes moving through trees and eyes watching from shadows. In one vivid sequence, I found myself in a forest clearing surrounded by the beings, trying desperately to understand what they were communicating with their gestures and sounds. Morning came with fog shrouding the forest. As we prepared to return to the cave, Dr. Webb provided last-minute coaching. "Move slowly. Make no threatening gestures. If they offer something, accept it. Try to mirror their body language." She handed me a small recording device. "Keep this running. Whatever happens, it's important to document." I still don't understand why they focused on me, I said. Dr. Webb studied me thoughtfully. In many indigenous traditions, certain people are believed to be able to bridge the gap between worlds, someone who can see and be seen across boundaries. I'm just a park ranger. Perhaps that's enough. You protect their territory in a way they understand. We set out in silence, retracing our path from the previous day. Martinez and Dr. Webb established their observation point about 200 yards from the cave, concealed in dense undergrowth with a clear line of sight to the entrance. I continued alone, heart pounding against my ribs. The forest seemed to close in around me, branches reaching like fingers, shadows deepening despite the morning light. At the stream crossing, I paused, sensing movement in the trees ahead. A large shadow detached itself from the forest, the creature from the cabin, watching me from the opposite bank. I raised my empty hands, showing I carried no weapon. I came back as promised. The being made a gesture, arm extended, palm up, then turned toward the cave. An invitation. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the stream, crossing to the other side. The creature turned and moved toward the cave, clearly expecting me to follow. I'm continuing to the cave, I spoke softly into the radio. The subject is present and appears non-aggressive. The cave entrance seemed darker than I remembered, a mouth opening into the unknown. The creature paused, looking back to ensure I was still following. As I stepped across the threshold, leaving the daylight behind, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was crossing more than just a physical boundary. Inside, the cave appeared different. New drawings covered one wall, crude representations of what looked like my cabin, stick figures with long limbs, and something that disturbingly resembled a human with a ranger hat. The creature moved deeper into the cave, leading me to the chamber I'd seen before. There, arranged in the center of the space, was a collection of objects: phones, cameras, watches, all technology taken from various visitors to the forest over what must have been decades. Among them, I recognized Mike's backpack, and sitting against the far wall, thin but alive, was Mike. He looked up as I entered, his eyes widening in disbelief. "Ranger Thompson, is that really you?" I rushed to his side, checking him for injuries. Besides being dehydrated and exhausted, he seemed relatively unharmed. "We've been searching for you for days. What happened?" "They took me," he said, his voice hoarse. "I was collecting firewood when I saw one watching me. I tried to take photos, then ran when it moved toward me. There were more of them. They surrounded me, brought me here." He glanced nervously at the creature standing at the cave entrance. "They've been studying me, I think. Taking my things, bringing me food and water." The larger creature made a rumbling sound, drawing my attention. It moved to the pile of technological objects, selecting Mike's phone. With surprising dexterity, it activated the screen, navigating to the photos. "They're obsessed with the pictures I took," Mike explained. "They keep looking at them, then at me, like they're trying to understand what the device does." The realization hit me. These beings understood that humans had technology that could prove their existence. They weren't just territorial. They were deliberately removing evidence. "They've been taking people who photograph them," I said slowly. "Not to harm them, but to confiscate the evidence." The creature made another sound, then pointed to Mike, then to me, then toward the cave entrance. The message seemed clear. I could take Mike and leave. Why now? I wondered aloud. Why let him go after keeping him for days? Mike looked between us. "Can we discuss this philosophical question after we get out of here?" I helped him to his feet, supporting his weight as he wobbled slightly. "We're leaving now. My team is waiting outside." As we moved toward the entrance, the creature blocked our path momentarily. It reached out, touching the ranger badge on my uniform, then pointed to itself. Dr. Webb's voice came through in my earpiece. "I think it's recognizing your role as a protector of the forest, similar to their own territorial behavior." "I understand," I told the creature, tapping my badge. "We protect the same land." This seemed to satisfy it. The being stepped aside, allowing us to pass. As we emerged into daylight, Mike squinted against the brightness. Martinez and Dr. Webb were already moving toward us, relief evident on their faces. Behind us, the creature remained in the shadow of the cave entrance, watching. "Don't look back," I told Mike. "Just keep moving toward the stream." As we crossed the water, I glanced back once. The creature had been joined by two others, including the smaller one I'd seen before. They stood silently at the cave entrance, a family group watching us retreat from their territory. "Will they follow us?" Mike asked nervously. "I don't think so," I replied. "They got what they wanted." Dr. Webb moved closer, her voice low. "This is unprecedented. A peaceful interaction, a clear exchange. This changes everything we understand about these beings. Or confirms what indigenous people have been saying for generations," I pointed out. Once we reached the observation point and Mike was safely seated, Martinez radioed for emergency medical evacuation. We were too deep in the wilderness for a ground extraction given Mike's condition. "What will you include in your report?" Martinez asked me privately. I looked back toward the distant cave, now invisible through the dense forest. The truth. That we found Mike in an abandoned mine shaft where he'd sought shelter after getting lost. And the creatures? I considered the question carefully. They've survived this long by remaining legends. Maybe that's how it should stay, at least for now. Dr. Webb overheard us. "You can't be serious. This is the scientific discovery of the century." "It's their forest," I said simply. "They were here first. They deserve their privacy." Martinez nodded in agreement. "The moment this gets out, their habitat would be overrun with curiosity seekers, hunters, media. They'd never know peace again." Dr. Webb looked conflicted. "My entire career has been building toward proof like this." "And now you have it," I replied. "For yourself. Isn't that enough?" The helicopter arrived an hour later, hovering above a small clearing half a mile from our position. As the medical team loaded Mike aboard, I heard distant vocalizations from the forest, the creatures communicating among themselves or perhaps saying goodbye. Before boarding, Dr. Webb approached me. "I'm keeping my research data, but I respect your decision. The Park Service has been covering this up for decades anyway." "Not covering up," I corrected. "Protecting. There's a difference." As the helicopter lifted off, I gazed down at the vast green canopy below. Somewhere in that ancient forest, intelligent beings watched and waited, as they had for centuries. I knew I would return to my cabin, continue my duties as a ranger, and keep the secret of what lived in the deepest parts of Olympic National Park. But I would never again feel alone in the wilderness. The forest had eyes, and now they knew me. 3 months passed. Summer brought the expected influx of tourists to Olympic National Park, keeping me busy with routine ranger duties. The Henderson family had stuck to our agreed story, that they had become disoriented and spent a night in the woods before being found by search teams. Mike similarly attributed his ordeal to becoming lost and taking shelter in an old mining tunnel. Dr. Webb remained in the park longer than planned, conducting her marmot research while surreptitiously gathering more data on our forest inhabitants. She departed eventually, with promises to keep their existence confidential, though I wondered how long her scientific curiosity would remain contained. My cabin felt different now. I'd grown accustomed to the sensation of being watched, no longer startled by occasional glimpses of large shapes moving through distant trees, or the found objects that sometimes appeared on my porch, interesting stones, unusually shaped branches, once even a perfect eagle feather left precisely centered on my welcome mat. Dale never questioned my official report, though something in his eyes told me he suspected the truth. He did, however, approve my request to restrict certain remote areas from public access, citing sensitive ecological research. "You seem different," he commented during one of his infrequent visits to my station. "More at peace out here." "I've found my place," I replied simply. On a warm August evening, I sat on my porch watching the sunset paint the forest canopy in gold. The familiar whooping calls echoed from the distant ridgeline, their evening communications. My radio crackled to life. "Thompson, you there? Got a report of unusual activity near Cedar Ridge. Probably nothing but worth checking out." I smiled to myself. "I'll handle it. Probably just our forest friends." 10-4. Just don't make any new acquaintances out there. Gathering my gear, I headed into the deepening twilight. The path was familiar now, worn by my frequent patrols. As I walked, I sensed movement paralleling my route, a large shadow keeping pace through the trees. My watcher. My guardian. Or perhaps I was theirs. The mystery that had begun in fear had transformed into something else. A strange symbiosis between ranger and legend, human and cryptid, two species sharing the same ancient forest but living in different worlds. Sometimes, when the night is especially quiet, I hear knocking on my cabin wall. That same rhythmic pattern. 3 quick taps, pause, 2 slow taps. I always respond in kind. I've learned much about them in these months. They avoid fire and technology. They communicate through complex vocalizations and sign language. They leave territorial markers that, once you know what to look for, are obvious throughout the deep forest. They observe humans constantly but rarely reveal themselves. And they remember faces, especially mine. Last week, a hiker reported seeing a bear standing on 2 legs near the restricted area. When I investigated, I found fresh footprints leading away from the trail, and the hiker's dropped camera with its memory card neatly removed. I smiled, knowing what had happened, and continued following the tracks. They led me to a small clearing where the memory card lay carefully placed on a flat, a gift, a sign of trust, an exchange. I left a ranger patch in its place, a symbol of my promise to protect not just the forest, but its most elusive inhabitants. That night, standing at the edge of my cabin clearing under a star-filled sky, I called out to the darkness using the vocalizations I'd been practicing. A simple greeting, according to Dr. Webb's research. From the blackness between ancient trees came a response, deeper, more resonant than any human voice could produce. I no longer fear the watcher in the woods. We guard the same wilderness, patrol the same boundaries, protect the same secrets. Sometimes, on my days off, I hike to the stream near the cave and sit quietly. Often, I'm joined by a large figure who keeps a respectful distance but seems to enjoy the companionable silence. We watch the water together, 2 sentient beings from different evolutionary paths, sharing a moment of peace. The locals have started noticing something different about my section of the park. Fewer missing hikers, less vandalism, a sense of being gently turned away from certain areas by an inexplicable feeling of unease or disorientation. "That north quadrant feels spooky," one seasonal ranger commented, "like something's watching you all the time." "Just the forest," I replied. "It's alive in its own way. More alive than they could possibly understand. Last night, I dreamed I was deep in the woods, surrounded by the creatures, not as an outsider, but as part of their circle. In the dream, I understood their language, their gestures, their ancient connection to this land. I woke to find fresh tracks in the soft earth around my cabin, a deliberate circle, as if something had been standing guard while I slept. My radio sits silent beside me now as I write this account. Soon it will crackle to life with routine park business, and I'll return to my official duties. But always in the corner of my eye, I'll sense movement among the trees. A flicker of dark fur. The gleam of intelligent eyes watching from shadow. The legends were always true. The forest has guardians older than human memory, more patient than our brief civilization. They were here before us, and if we're wise enough to protect their secrets, they'll remain long after we're gone. I am Ranger Thompson of Olympic National Park, assigned to the North Quadrant. My jurisdiction includes 1 million acres of pristine wilderness, dozens of hiking trails, multiple waterways, countless wildlife species, and a family of Sasquatch who know me by name. Every evening, as darkness claims the forest, I stand on my porch and call out to my watcher with 3 quick taps, pause, 2 slow taps against the wooden railing. The answer always comes, echoing from the ancient trees. I am never alone in these woods, and neither are you. First thing you gotta know about me is I don't like mysteries. I solve them. I work for the Missing Persons Unit in Albuquerque, New Mexico. It's a job where every day could bring in another puzzle, another lost soul. Today was no different, at least not at first glance. The sun was just creeping over the Sandia Mountains when I got the call about Amanda Novak. 19, college student, vanished without a trace. The call came from dispatch at 5:47 a.m. I was already up, nursing my 3rd cup of coffee and watching the sunrise paint the mountains that pink-orange color that never gets old, no matter how many years you live here. My phone buzzed against the kitchen counter, the screen lighting up with the precinct's number. Missing Persons, Detective Reyes, I answered, voice still rough with sleep. The dispatcher's voice was clipped, professional. We've got a missing college student, Amanda Novak, 19. Roommate reported her missing when she didn't return from a run yesterday evening, last seen in the North Valley area. The North Valley. I knew it well, an old part of town where narrow streets wind between adobe houses and irrigation ditches, where cottonwood trees create shadows that seem to move on their own when the wind blows, where people can disappear. I'm on it, I said, already reaching for my keys. I grabbed my bag packed with essentials, a flashlight, notebook, camera, and my Glock 19. This wasn't my first rodeo, but nothing could have prepared me for what was coming. The morning was cool, that distinctive New Mexico chill that burns off by 10 a.m. I drove through streets still half asleep, my mind cycling through the usual scenarios. Voluntary disappearance, foul play, accident. Every case starts the same way, with possibilities narrowing as evidence accumulates. Amanda's apartment was in a complex near UNM, the kind of place that charges too much for too little space. The building manager let me in with a face that said he'd done this before. Inside was a typical student dive. Posters of bands I didn't recognize plastered the walls, books strewn about, and a half-eaten pizza on the table. Her roommate, Jessica, was a wreck. Red-rimmed eyes, hands that wouldn't stop shaking as she clutched a mug of cold coffee. When did you last see her? I asked, pulling out my notebook. Yesterday around 6. She went for a run like she always does. Jessica's voice cracked. She said she'd be back in an hour. She never misses class. Never. I nodded, writing it down. Where does she usually run? The Bosque trails. She said she likes how quiet it is there. The Bosque, a dense cottonwood forest that follows the Rio Grande through the city. Miles of trails, some marked, some not. Easy to get turned around if you don't know it well. Did she take her phone? Jessica nodded. She always does, for music. I've been calling and texting, but it goes straight to voicemail now. Any troubles lately? Arguments with friends? Problems at school? No, nothing like that. Amanda's nice. Everyone likes her. Jessica's eyes welled up again. She wouldn't just disappear. I continued my questioning, gathering details. Amanda's habits, her classes, her friends. The picture building in my mind was of a responsible student, a creature of routine. Not someone who would vanish on a whim. On Jessica's phone, I found the tracking app they used to share locations. Amanda's last known position was indeed in the Bosque, near the northern edge where the trails get wild and less maintained. I need her running clothes, I said. Something with her scent. Jessica looked confused but didn't ask questions. She returned with a worn t-shirt. I'll find her, I promised, though I'd learned long ago not to make promises in this job. Outside, I called for a K-9 unit to meet me at the Bosque entrance. The morning had warmed, but as I drove toward the river, a chill settled in my bones that had nothing to do with the temperature. 20 years in this job, and I've developed something of a sixth sense. Some cases feel wrong from the start. This was one of them. The Bosque, a dense cottonwood forest along the Rio Grande, was where Amanda often ran. The thick underbrush and winding paths made it easy to get lost, but Amanda knew these trails well. I parked at the North Valley trailhead, a small dirt lot with a weathered information board showing faded trail maps. Officer Diaz was already waiting with Kona, a Belgian Malinois with a nose that had found 3 missing people in the last year alone. I handed him Amanda's shirt. "North Trail," I said. "She was last tracked about 2 miles in." Diaz nodded, letting Kona get the scent. "Been raining upstream. River's running high. Makes the ground scent trickier." I hadn't noticed, but he was right. The river rushed nearby, louder than usual, the water brown with silt. Spring runoff, coming down from Colorado. We followed the main path, dirt packed hard from years of hikers and runners. The morning light filtered through the canopy above, dappling the ground with shifting patterns. Despite the nearby city, the Bosque swallows sound. Within minutes, the traffic noise faded, replaced by rustling leaves and distant bird calls. It was serene, almost deceptively so. Kona led us at a steady pace, nose to the ground. Other runners passed us, giving curious looks to the cop and his dog. I scanned their faces automatically, a habit from years on the job. Nobody looked suspicious, just regular people getting their morning exercise. About a mile in, we passed a homeless encampment, empty now, but recently used. Blankets, a small charred circle where a fire had been. I made a mental note to check back later. The homeless see things others miss. The farther we went, the wilder the Bosque became. The main trail split and split again, smaller paths branching off like capillaries. Kona seemed confident, pulling Diaz toward one of the less traveled routes. "She's got something," Diaz said. The path narrowed, brush closing in on both sides. Brambles snagged at my pants. This wasn't a maintained trail anymore, more like a game path. Not somewhere casual joggers typically went. About 2 miles in, I found her tracks, small and purposeful, the tread of running shoes pressed into a patch of mud. They led off the main path, which was odd. Amanda was described as cautious, a creature of habit. Why would she leave the trail? "Hold up," I called to Diaz, kneeling to examine the footprints more closely. The impressions were clear. She hadn't been running here, but walking, deliberately placing each foot. Following something? Or someone? Kona whined, pulling at her leash. Diaz struggled to hold her back. "She's excited about something," he said. We continued, more slowly now, my eyes scanning the ground, the bushes, the trees. A glint caught my eye, a reflection of sunlight on glass. I stepped off the path and found a phone lying in the leaves, screen cracked but still functioning. I pulled a latex glove from my pocket and picked it up. The lock screen showed a photo of Amanda with another girl, both smiling. Jessica had mentioned a distinctive phone case with sunflowers. This was Amanda's. I pocketed it, hoping it would provide some clues later. Then I saw the blood. It wasn't much, a small smear on a nearby tree, about shoulder height. Fresh enough to still look wet in the center. "Diaz," I called, pointing. "We've got blood." He nodded grimly, speaking into his radio to update dispatch. I followed the direction the blood indicated, each step more cautious than the last. The forest seemed to close in, the trees whispering secrets I couldn't quite hear. The sunlight dimmed as clouds moved overhead, casting everything in a gray pall. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Then, in a small clearing, I found more blood. A lot more. A splash pattern against a boulder, droplets scattered across fallen leaves. And something else. A piece of fabric torn and stained. I recognized the pattern from Jessica's description of what Amanda had been wearing. A blue running jacket with yellow stripes. "Call it in," I told Diaz. "We need a full team out here now." As he radioed for backup, I circled the clearing, trying to make sense of the scene. There had been a struggle here. The ground was disturbed, leaves scattered, small branches broken. but no drag marks. Nothing to indicate which way a body, dead or alive, might have been taken. Kona was agitated, pacing in circles, her training at odds with something that clearly disturbed her. "What is it, girl?" Diaz murmured, trying to calm her. I checked my watch. It had been nearly 18 hours since Amanda disappeared. In missing persons cases, the first 48 hours are critical. After that, the chances of finding someone alive drop dramatically. "We're not waiting for backup," I decided. "Which way is she indicating?" Diaz let Kona lead, and she pulled us deeper into the woods, away from any established trail. The underbrush grew thicker, thorns tearing at our clothes. The air felt heavier, moisture clinging to my skin despite the desert climate. Time was of the essence, but every step became more difficult as the Bosque seemed determined to keep its secrets. That's when I saw it, a cave entrance hidden behind a thicket. The mouth was small, easily missed if you weren't looking for it. The air around it was unnaturally cold, and a sense of dread washed over me. Kona refused to go near it, backing away with her ears flat against her head. "I've never seen her do that," Diaz said, confusion in his voice. I pulled out my flashlight, its beam weak in the growing gloom of the afternoon. The cave mouth seemed to swallow the light. But I had no choice. Amanda could be in there, injured, dying. Backup was at least 15 minutes away. "Stay here with Kona," I told Diaz. "If I'm not back in 10 minutes, bring everyone in." I drew my gun, clicked on the tactical light attached to the barrel, and took a deep breath. Then I stepped into the darkness. Inside the cave, the darkness was suffocating. My flashlight cut through the black, revealing walls covered in strange, ancient symbols. This wasn't just a cave. It was something else. Something wrong. The entrance narrowed quickly into a tight passage that forced me to hunch over. The stone was smooth beneath my fingers, unnaturally so, as if worn down by centuries of touch. The air was stale, carrying a metallic scent that caught in the back of my throat. Those symbols, they weren't graffiti or modern markings. They looked etched into the stone, spiraling patterns and angular shapes that reminded me of Anasazi petroglyphs I'd seen in Chaco Canyon, but different. Wrong somehow. They seemed to shimmer in my flashlight beam, an optical illusion that made my head throb. Water dripped somewhere ahead, each drop echoing in the confined space. I moved slowly, testing each step. The passage sloped downward, taking me deeper beneath the Bosque. How was this possible? I'd lived in Albuquerque my entire life and had never heard of caves in the Bosque. The Rio Grande Valley wasn't known for cave systems, yet here I was, descending into the earth, the entrance already lost behind me as the passage twisted and turned. I checked my phone. No signal, as expected. The watch on my wrist showed I'd been inside for just 3 minutes, though it felt much longer. The passage widened suddenly into a small chamber. My light revealed more of those disturbing symbols covering the walls from floor to ceiling, some carved deep into the rock, others painted with what looked disturbingly like dried blood. In the center of the chamber, a circle of stones surrounded a small fire pit, long cold but recently used. Ash still held the shape of burned logs. People had been here. Recently. A sound made me freeze, a faint noise ahead, a shuffling sound that raised the hairs on the back of my neck. I dimmed my light, listening intently over the pounding of my heart. There it was again. Not an animal. The rhythm was wrong, deliberate, almost mechanical. Something moving in the darkness ahead. I raised my gun, advancing slowly toward another passage leading from the chamber. This one was larger, tall enough to stand upright. The air flowing from it was colder, carrying that same metallic scent. Stronger now. The symbols on the walls grew more elaborate, more disturbing. Humanoid figures with elongated limbs, animals with too many eyes, shapes that hurt to look at directly. The passage opened into a much larger cavern, the ceiling lost in darkness above. My flashlight couldn't penetrate the full extent of the space. I heard a moan, human and pained, Swinging my light toward the sound, I saw her. Amanda was there, but she wasn't alone. She lay on a stone altar of some kind, arms and legs bound with what looked like braided plant fibers. Her running clothes were torn and bloody, her face bruised. She was conscious, eyes wide with terror, fixed on something standing over her, something that turned toward my light. It was humanoid, but its proportions were all wrong. Too tall, too thin, its limbs too long. It moved with a fluidity that defied logic, joints bending in impossible directions. My breath caught as I saw its face, or rather, the absence of one. Where features should have been, there was only a smooth, featureless surface like polished alabaster. "Police, don't move!" My voice echoed in the cavern, sounding weak and ineffectual even to my own ears. The creature didn't react, continuing whatever it had been doing to Amanda. I could see now that it held something in its elongated fingers, a stone knife, edge glinting wetly with what could only be blood. I aimed my gun, shouting a warning, but it didn't react. Amanda lay on the ground, her eyes finding mine, silently pleading. I took a step forward, and the creature's head snapped toward me. It didn't have eyes, but I knew it was watching. I fired, the gunshot deafening in the confined space. The creature recoiled, emitting a high-pitched sound that seemed to pierce my skull. It moved faster than anything I've ever seen, darting into the darkness at the far side of the cavern. I rushed to Amanda, checking her pulse. She was alive, but barely. Deep cuts covered her arms in patterns that matched the symbols on the walls. She'd lost a lot of blood. "Help is coming," I told her, working to untie her bonds. "Stay with me, Amanda." Her eyelids fluttered. "There's more," she whispered, voice barely audible. "They took the others." "What others?" But she had slipped into unconsciousness. I called in my position, shouting into my radio, urgently requesting medical assistance. The radio crackled with static, but I heard enough to know they'd received it. As I waited, I heard distant voices echoing through the passages, a comforting sound amidst the terror. Diaz was the first to arrive, Kona no longer with him. Other officers followed, their flashlights cutting through the darkness, expressions of disbelief on their faces as they took in the cavern, the symbols, the altar. Amanda stirred as the paramedics arrived, her eyes fluttering open. She looked at me, terror etched in her features. "It's still here," she whispered. "It's not alone." Her words sent a chill down my spine. The cavern seemed to breathe, the air thick with an unseen presence. I scanned the darkness, but the creature was gone. For now. As they carried Amanda out, I stayed behind, my flashlight cutting through the darkness, revealing nothing but rock and shadow. Yet the feeling of being watched never left. One of the other detectives approached, his face pale in the harsh light. "What the hell happened here?" I shook my head, unable to put it into words. "I don't know. But whatever it is, it's not over." The crime scene techs moved in, photographing the symbols, collecting samples of the blood, documenting everything with clinical precision that seemed at odds with the otherworldly nature of the place. I left them to it, making my way back toward the surface. My mind reeled, trying to process what I'd seen. That creature wasn't human, wasn't anything I could explain, and according to Amanda, there were more of them. I left the cave, the fading light of the day casting long shadows across the Bosque. Amanda was safe for now, but questions remained. What was that creature? How many more were there? As I made my way back to the office, the weight of the unknown pressed on me. The sun had set by the time I reached my car, the forest now a wall of impenetrable darkness behind me. The trip back to the precinct was a blur, my mind replaying what I'd seen in that cavern. The faceless creature, the ancient symbols, Amanda's warning. Captain Rodriguez was waiting when I arrived, his office light the only one still burning on our floor. He waved me in without preamble. "The girl's stable," he said before I could ask. "She's at Presbyterian. Heavy sedation, but the doctors say she'll pull through. I nodded, relief washing over me. At least something had gone right today. Now, Rodriguez continued, leaning forward. Want to tell me what the hell happened out there? Your report said something about a cave and ritualistic elements. The responding officers are talking about other things. I hesitated, knowing how it would sound. Sir, I saw something in that cave. Something not human. To his credit, Rodriguez didn't laugh or dismiss me outright. He'd known me long enough to trust my judgment. Not human how? I described the creature as best I could. Its impossible proportions, its faceless head, the unnatural way it moved. With each detail, Rodriguez's expression grew more grave. You fired your weapon? Yes, sir. It seemed to hit, but I don't think it did much damage. He sighed, rubbing his temples. Physical evidence. Crime scenes processing the cave now. Blood samples, the bindings used on Amanda, photographs of those symbols on the walls, and I pulled out my phone, scrolling to the photos I'd taken after the paramedics had taken Amanda away. These. I showed him images of the altar, the strange circle of stones, close-ups of the most distinctive symbols. Rodriguez studied them, his face unreadable. I've seen these before, he said finally, surprising me. Or something like them. 20 years ago, my first year on the force, a case in the South Valley. 3 missing persons, all found in an abandoned house near the river. They had these same symbols carved into their skin. A chill ran down my spine. What happened to them? 2 died from blood loss. The 3rd lived but was never the same. Committed suicide 6 months later. Rodriguez looked up at me, his eyes dark with memory. We never caught whoever did it. At the precinct, I reviewed the evidence. Amanda's phone held a video, shaky and dark, but unmistakable. She must have started recording when she first sensed something wrong. The footage began with normal running shots. The trail, her breathing heavy but regular. Then she stopped suddenly, the camera jerking as if she'd been startled. Hello? Her voice called. Is someone there? The camera panned, catching glimpses of the forest. Nothing unusual at first. Then, for just a second, something moved between the trees. A tall, thin shape, its form distorted by the camera's motion. Amanda's breathing quickened. Who's there? More movement in the background, too fast to track properly. The video continued for another minute. Amanda moving off the trail, following whatever she'd seen. The final frame showed the entrance to the cave, just before the recording cut off. My mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. I sent the video to a specialist, Dr. Evan Linden, at UNM's anthropology department. If anyone could shed light on those symbols, it would be him. Days passed with little progress. Amanda remained in the hospital, her condition stable but her mind fractured by fear. The creature haunted my thoughts, its faceless visage a constant reminder of what lurked in the shadows. The crime scene team had finished with the cave. Their findings raised more questions than answers. The blood was human, some Amanda's, some older, from unknown sources. Carbon dating of material from the deepest layer of the fire pit suggested it had been in use for centuries. The symbols matched no known language or pictographic system. I spent hours in the hospital with Amanda, gently questioning her when she was lucid. Her story emerged in fragments, dreamlike and disjointed. She remembered running, seeing movement in the trees, following out of curiosity, thinking it was a deer or coyote, finding the cave entrance, being drawn inside by sounds, like singing, but not with voices. They surrounded me, she whispered during one session, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Tall things with no faces. They spoke in my head, showed me things. What things, Amanda? I asked, keeping my voice gentle. Other worlds, places where they come from. They've been here a long time, watching us. A tear slid down her cheek. They need us for something. Our blood, our fear. They feed on it somehow. I believed her, After what I'd seen, I had no choice. Then a breakthrough. Dr. Linden called with news, his voice tense with excitement and fear. "I've seen these symbols before," he said, his voice grave. "They're ancient, predating known civilizations. They speak of watchers, beings from another realm." "Watchers," I echoed, my mind struggling to grasp the implications. "According to the oldest texts, they exist in the spaces between our world and others. They're drawn to places of power, feeding on fear and chaos," Dr. Linden explained. "If they've been summoned or awakened, it means something powerful is at play." His words offered little comfort. If these creatures were indeed the stuff of ancient legend, our battle had just begun. "How do we fight them?" I asked. The silence on the line stretched too long. "I don't know if we can," he finally answered. "But I'm sending you something. A monograph from the 1920s. A researcher named Hargrove documented similar sightings in New England. He believed the Watchers were tied to a physical anchor in our world. Destroy that, and they might be forced back." An anchor, the altar in the cave, the circle of stones, or something else entirely. I shared the findings with my team, knowing we had to prepare for the worst. Most were skeptical, but those who'd been in the cave with me understood. Something was happening in Albuquerque, something beyond our understanding, and it was getting worse. Weeks turned into months, and the creature remained elusive. Reports of disappearances grew, each one a grim reminder of the lurking threat. We tracked the patterns, each sighting more disturbing than the last. The Watchers were here, and they were multiplying. 5 more people had vanished around the Bosque. 2 bodies were found bearing the same ritualistic cuts as Amanda. The others remained missing. The public was demanding answers, but what could we tell them? That faceless creatures from another realm were hunting in our city. The official line was a serial killer targeting joggers and hikers. The mayor formed a task force. I was put in charge, given resources and manpower, but the truth remained our secret, known only to those who'd seen the evidence firsthand. Dr. Linden became our unofficial consultant, poring over ancient texts and folklore from around the world. Accounts of the Watchers appeared across cultures, faceless observers who occasionally crossed over, taking humans for purposes unknown. Meanwhile, Amanda recovered physically, though nightmares plagued her sleep. The cuts on her arms healed into raised scars that formed those same disturbing symbols. She claimed they burned whenever the Watchers were near. "They're getting stronger," she told me during one visit. "I can feel them. More are coming through." I believed her. The sightings were increasing, not just near the original cave, but throughout the Bosque. Security cameras in nearby neighborhoods caught glimpses. Tall, thin figures moving impossibly fast, always at night, always near where someone would later disappear. We set up surveillance, cameras and sensors covering the Bosque. Night after night we waited, the forest a silent witness to our vigilance. And then one night, the monitors flickered to life. It was just after midnight when the call came in. One of our motion sensors had been triggered near the original cave. The thermal cameras showed nothing. The Watchers apparently didn't give off heat. But the night vision picked up movement. Shadows moved, faster than the eye could see. The Watchers had returned. I assembled a team, officers who'd seen the evidence, who knew what we were facing. We were armed with everything from standard-issue Glocks to shotguns loaded with rock salt. Dr. Linden's suggestion based on folklore about repelling spirits. Amanda insisted on coming. "I can sense them," she argued. "I'll know if they're nearby, even if your equipment doesn't pick them up." Against my better judgment, I agreed. Her scars had begun to glow faintly in the darkness, an unearthly blue light seeping from the symbols carved into her skin. We moved in, a team of armed officers plus Amanda and Dr. Linden, ready to confront the unknown. The air was thick with tension, every rustle a potential threat. My flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing the same cave entrance, now surrounded by police tape that fluttered in the night breeze. Inside, the symbols glowed faintly, a malevolent energy pulsing from the walls. The cave seemed larger than before, the passages wider, as if it had grown or revealed more of itself. We advanced cautiously, following Amanda's lead. Her scars pulsed brighter as we descended, casting eerie shadows on the stone walls. "They're here," she whispered unnecessarily. We could all feel it now, a pressure in the air, a sense of being watched from all sides. The creatures moved in the shadows, their forms barely perceptible even with our lights. Then one stepped into view, its faceless head turning toward us, limbs moving with that fluid, wrong motion. Officer Martinez fired first, his shotgun roaring in the confined space. The creature recoiled, a high-pitched keening filling the air. More emerged from hidden passages surrounding us. We fired, bullets finding their marks but having little effect. The watchers recoiled from the rock salt, their forms momentarily disrupted before reforming. It was a battle of attrition, our determination against their otherworldly resilience. Amanda fell to her knees, overwhelmed by proximity to the things that had marked her. "The center," she gasped, pointing deeper into the cave. "Everything flows from the center." We pushed deeper, fighting our way through, the air growing colder, the darkness more oppressive. And then we found it, a chamber we hadn't discovered before, its walls lined with the same symbols, a pulsating stone at its center. The stone was obsidian black, roughly spherical, hovering inches above a pedestal without visible support. It pulsed with an inner light, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. "That's it!" Dr. Linden shouted over the chaos. "The anchor, destroy it!" The watchers seemed to understand his words, or at least our intent. They converged on us with renewed ferocity, their movements becoming more solid, more dangerous. "Cover me!" I shouted, pushing forward while the others laid down, suppressing fire. The watchers screeched, the sound cutting through my skull like glass. I reached the stone, its surface emanating a cold so intense it burned my skin. Dr. Linden's voice echoed in my mind. "Destroy the source." I aimed my gun, fired. The bullet struck the stone, and for a second, nothing happened. Then a crack appeared, spreading across its surface like ice breaking. I fired again and again. The stone shattered with a sound that wasn't sound, more a feeling, a psychic shockwave that knocked us all to the ground. The cave shook, a deafening roar filling the space. The watchers writhed, their forms dissipating into the ether, pulled apart like smoke in a high wind. Amanda screamed, her scars blazing with light before fading to normal. The symbols on the walls dulled, crumbling to dust before our eyes. We emerged from the cave battered but victorious, into a dawn that seemed impossibly bright after the darkness below. The watchers were gone, the symbols fading into obscurity. In the following weeks, the disappearances stopped. The city returned to its uneasy peace, most citizens never knowing how close they'd come to something beyond understanding. Amanda recovered, her memories of the ordeal hazy but no longer haunting. The scars remained but were now just scars, the power gone from them. The case closed, the reports filed, but the memory of the watchers lingered. As I sat in my office, the weight of what we had faced settled in. The world was not as it seemed, shadows hiding ancient evils. We had won this battle, but the war was far from over. For now, the watchers were gone. But I knew, deep down, they were not the only ones. The world was full of mysteries, and my job was far from done. As I locked up for the night, a sense of resolve filled me. Whatever came next, I would be ready. The wind whispered through the trees as I stepped outside, the city lights casting long shadows. The watchers were gone, but the darkness remained, a constant reminder of the unknown. And in that darkness I found my purpose. I don't like mysteries. I solve them, even when the answers terrify me. I'm Sebastian Harlow, and back in 2017 I decided to escape the bustle of London by trekking through the Scottish Highlands. Always fancied myself a bit of an adventurer, even if my idea of roughing it usually involves a lukewarm latte. The first few days were pure bliss. Just me, rolling hills and the occasional sheep giving me the side eye. I'd left behind the noise, the emails, and my boss's questionable obsession with team-building exercises. Who knew that solitude could be so therapeutic? But as I ventured deeper into the Highlands, the landscape began to change. The tourist trails had long since disappeared, replaced by ancient stone paths that seemed to lead nowhere. The sheep became fewer, replaced by ravens that watched me with unnatural stillness from twisted hawthorn trees. The air itself felt heavier here, pregnant with something I couldn't name. One afternoon, while attempting to read a map that might as well have been in hieroglyphics, I stumbled upon a tiny village not marked on any of the guides. But stumbled was the wrong word. I felt drawn to it as if invisible threads had been pulling me forward for miles. The place looked like it had been plucked straight out of a postcard, but one that had been left in the sun too long. Its colors faded and wrong. Quaint stone cottages lined a single street, their windows dark despite the late afternoon light. A little pub with a swinging sign creaked in a wind I couldn't feel. The locals, what few I glimpsed, moved with the deliberate slowness of people who knew they were being watched. They probably knew each other's tea preferences, I thought, but as I drew closer, I noticed how their eyes never quite met mine. How conversations died the moment I passed. Feeling both curious and in dire need of a decent meal, I headed toward the pub. The sign above the door bore no name, just a crude painting of a wolf's head, its mouth open in a snarl that seemed to follow my movement. The wood looked ancient, worn smooth by countless hands, and stained dark with what I hoped was merely age and weather. Inside, the atmosphere was warm, filled with the smell of hearty stew and something else, something metallic and sharp that made my nostrils flare. The sound of laughter echoed from the shadows, but I couldn't quite locate its source. Candles flickered in iron sconces, casting dancing shadows that seemed to move independently of their flames. The floorboards groaned under my feet with each step, as if the building itself was announcing my presence. I took a seat at the bar next to an older gentleman nursing a pint. His fingers, I noticed, were stained with what looked like rust, though his knuckles bore fresh scratches. When he smiled, his teeth seemed too sharp, too numerous. "Not often we see new faces around here," he said, eyeing me over his glass. His voice carried the weight of Highland moors, rough and ancient. "Especially ones that find us. Well, I'm not often lost, so I guess we're both breaking routines," I replied with a chuckle that sounded hollow in the strange acoustics of the pub. He smirked, revealing more of those unsettling teeth. "Name's Alistair. And you are?" "Sebastian. Just doing a bit of exploring." "Exploring, eh?" Alistair's eyes glinted in the candlelight, and I noticed they reflected the flame like an animal's. "Best be careful wandering these parts alone." I raised an eyebrow, forcing levity into my voice. "Why's that?" "Afraid I'll run into Nessie on land?" He let out a dry laugh that turned into something that might have been a growl, a sense of humor. "You'll need that." Before I could press him further, the bartender placed a bowl of stew in front of me. The man was enormous, with hands like ham hocks and arms that stretched his sleeves to their limits. "On the house," he said with a nod. "You look like you could use it." "That's awfully kind of you," I replied, though I was starting to sense an odd vibe. The stew smelled delicious, rich and savory, but when I stirred it with my spoon, I glimpsed what looked like fragments of bone, too large to be from any typical livestock. As the evening wore on, I noticed that the locals would occasionally glance my way, whispering among themselves in what sounded like Gaelic, though the words carried undertones that made my skin crawl. Their eyes held a hunger that had nothing to do with food. Deciding it was probably just small-town curiosity, I finished my meal and stood to leave, ignoring how the meat had been too tough, too stringy, with a flavor I couldn't quite place. "Heading out already?" Alistair asked, his hand falling on my shoulder with surprising weight. "Yeah, want to set up camp before it gets too dark." He paused, as if weighing his words carefully. His grip on my shoulder tightened almost imperceptibly. "Mind the full moon tonight." I chuckled, but the sound died in my throat when I saw his expression. "What, are werewolves a problem around here?" His eyes locked onto mine, and in their depths I saw something that made my blood freeze. "Just mind yourself, Sebastian Harlow." I hadn't told him my last name. Taking that as my cue to leave, I stepped out into the cool evening air. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple that looked like fresh bruises. But as I walked away from the village, I could feel dozens of eyes watching me from darkened windows. The sensation crawled up my spine like cold fingers. I found a clearing just outside the village and set up my tent, my hands shaking slightly as I worked. As I settled in, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was the way Alistair had looked at me, or perhaps the eerily quiet surroundings. Even the usual Highland sounds, wind through grass, distant bird calls, had fallen silent. "You're overthinking, Seb," I muttered to myself, but my voice seemed to be swallowed by the darkness around me. Not everyone is out to get you, but as I lay in my sleeping bag, staring up at the tense fabric, I kept thinking about Alistair's teeth, about the stew's strange flavor, about the way the entire village had felt like a trap waiting to spring. The full moon, visible through my tent's mesh window, seemed to grin down at me with malevolent amusement. Sleep came surprisingly easy, but it was filled with dreams of yellow eyes and the sound of something large moving through the darkness just beyond my vision. I was jolted awake by the sound of distant howling. Sitting up, I listened intently, my heart already racing from dreams I couldn't quite remember. Wolves weren't common in Scotland, were they? But this howling was different from anything I'd heard in nature documentaries. It carried an intelligence, a deliberate quality that made my skin crawl. The howling grew louder, more numerous. It sounded like a pack, but the calls seemed to echo in response to each other, forming a pattern that was almost linguistic, almost conversational. "Great. Just what I need," I mumbled, considering whether to stay put or investigate. But curiosity had always been my weakness, and despite every instinct screaming at me to stay hidden, I found myself reaching for my flashlight, grabbing my flashlight and a small pocket knife, the kind that's more useful for cutting cheese than self-defense. I ventured out of the tent. The night was crisp and the full moon illuminated the landscape with an unnatural clarity. Everything looked different in the silver light, more angular and threatening. The hills that had seemed welcoming during the day now loomed like sleeping giants. Following the sound, I made my way through a thicket of trees. The branches seemed to reach for me with gnarled fingers, and more than once I felt something brush against my back that couldn't have been wind. The howling had ceased, replaced by an unsettling silence that felt heavy and expectant. Just as I was about to turn back, I stumbled upon a grisly scene that made my stomach lurch. Scattered belongings littered the ground, a torn backpack, shredded clothing, and what looked alarmingly like bloodstains painting the earth in abstract patterns. But it was the smell that hit me hardest, copper and meat, mixed with something wild and musky that made my primitive brain scream warnings. My heart raced as I swept my flashlight across the carnage. A sleeping bag had been shredded with what looked like massive claws, its fillings scattered like cotton snow. A hiking boot sat upright beside a tree, but its laces were snapped and something dark stained the leather. Worst of all was what I found partially buried under a pile of leaves. Fragments of bone that had been cracked open, the marrow inside licked clean. This was no place for a stand-up comedy routine, I whispered, but a nervous joke slipped out anyway. "Looks like someone had a worse night than me." That's when I heard the rustling behind me. Spinning around, I shone the flashlight toward the noise, my hand trembling so badly the beam danced across the trees like a strobe light. Nothing. But the silence that followed felt alive, breathing. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking like a teenager's. "Anyone there?" The silence stretched on, broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing. Then from somewhere in the darkness came a sound that turned my blood to ice, a low, rumbling chuckle that was distinctly not human. Deciding I'd had enough adventure for one night, I turned to head back to my tent. But that's when I saw it, lurking between the trees like a nightmare-given form. A massive figure stood perfectly still, watching me. It was unlike any animal I'd ever seen, standing on all fours but with a hulking frame that suggested immense strength. Its fur was dark and matted with what looked like dried blood, and it moved with a predatory grace that spoke of intelligence far beyond any beast. The creature was enormous, easily the size of a small car, but it was the wrongness of its proportions that truly terrified me. Its limbs were too long, its shoulders too broad, and when it turned its head to look at me, I saw that its neck twisted at an angle that should have been impossible. Its eyes reflected my flashlight beam like twin coins of molten gold, and in their depths I saw not the simple hunger of an animal, but something far more terrifying, malevolent intelligence. I froze, hoping that maybe if I stayed still it wouldn't notice me. But those golden eyes found mine immediately, and I felt something pass between us, a recognition perhaps, or a challenge. The creature's lips pulled back in what might have been a grin, revealing rows of teeth that were too numerous, too varied in size. Some were the fangs of a wolf, others looked almost human, and a few were needle-sharp things that belonged in no earthly mouth. "Easy there, big fella," I whispered, as if negotiating with a stray dog, though every fiber of my being knew this was no mere animal. The creature cocked its head at my words, and I swear I saw amusement flicker in those terrible eyes. Then, without warning, it charged. Instinct took over, and I sprinted back toward the village, adrenaline pumping through my veins like liquid fire. The trees blurred past me as I navigated the terrain with a speed I didn't know I possessed. Branches whipping at my face and thorns tearing at my clothes. Behind me, the sound of heavy footsteps thundered through the forest, but they weren't the footsteps of an animal. They fell in a rhythm too regular, too purposeful. The creature was hunting me. I could hear it crashing through the undergrowth behind me. But worse than the sound was what I couldn't hear. No heavy panting, no signs of exertion. Whatever was chasing me wasn't even winded by the pursuit. It was playing with me, letting me run just far enough to taste hope before closing the distance again. Bursting into the open field near the village, I spotted a farmhouse with lights on. The windows glowed like beacons of salvation, and I summoned every ounce of energy I had left to dash toward them. But as I ran, I risked a glance back and immediately wished I hadn't. The creature had emerged from the tree line and was loping after me with fluid grace, but now in the moonlight I could see it more clearly. Its body was a twisted amalgamation of wolf and something else, something that might once have been human. Its front limbs ended in hands rather than paws, hands with fingers that were too long and tipped with claws like obsidian daggers. And its face? God, its face was the stuff of nightmares. The muzzle of a wolf, but with two human eyes and an expression of cruel intelligence that no animal should possess. I banged on the farmhouse door frantically, my fists hammering against the wood so hard I felt my knuckles split. "Help! Please let me in!" The door swung open and a middle-aged woman pulled me inside with surprising strength. Her face was grim, marked with lines that spoke of long familiarity with fear. "What's gotten into you?" she demanded, but her eyes were already scanning the darkness behind me. "There's something out there," I panted, my chest burning from the run. She glanced past me, her expression turning grimmer still. "You've seen it." Before I could reply, heavy thuds echoed around the house, followed by a sound that made my skin crawl. Long, deliberate scratches against the wooden walls. The creature was circling the property, marking its territory, claiming its prey. "Get away from the windows," she ordered, ushering me into a back room. "And whatever you do, don't look directly at it. Sometimes it remembers faces." There, huddled together in the back room, were two children and an elderly man. The children, a girl who couldn't have been more than 8 and a boy perhaps 10, pressed against their grandfather with the practiced terror of those who had lived through this before. Their eyes were wide and glassy, the look of prey animals who knew the predator was near. "Is someone going to tell me what's happening?" I whispered urgently, though part of me dreaded the answer. The woman sighed, and I noticed how her hands shook as she drew the curtains tight. "It's been hunting these parts for weeks. Took down livestock first, sheep, cattle, even the McKinnon's prize bull. Tore them apart piece by piece, but didn't eat them all. Left pieces, like it was marking territory. And then," I asked, though I already knew the answer would be worse, "then it started on people." Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Hikers at first. Solo travelers like yourself. We found what was left of them scattered through the woods. But it's getting bolder. Last week it took old William right from his garden. We found his wheelbarrow overturned, blood everywhere, but—" She swallowed hard. "We never found all of him." The elderly man spoke up, his voice weathered and grim. "The village didn't want to scare visitors, but looks like you found out the hard way. We've been trying to keep it contained, to keep it away from the main roads." "Well, isn't that just fantastic?" I said, half laughing in disbelief. "I come here to find myself, and instead I find a monster. Talk about getting more than you bargained for." The house shook from a heavy impact that rattled the windows and sent dust cascading from the ceiling. Whatever was outside had just thrown its full weight against the structure. The children whimpered, clinging to each other with desperate fingers. "We need to get to the cellar," the elderly man said, struggling to his feet. "It's the only place that's reinforced. Stone walls thick enough to—" His words were cut off by the sound of splintering wood from somewhere above us. The creature had found a way in. As we made our way down the creaky steps to the cellar, the house shook from another heavy impact. Each footstep above us sent vibrations through the floorboards, and I could hear the distinctive sound of claws scraping against wood. But it wasn't random destruction. There was purpose to it. Intelligence. The creature was exploring, learning the layout of the house. "Any chance this thing hates knock-knock jokes?" I quipped, attempting to lighten the mood, but my voice sounded hollow and desperate even to my own ears. "Now's not the time," the woman hissed, but I caught the ghost of a smile on her lips. Even in terror, humans reached for humor as a shield against the dark. In the dim light of the cellar, I noticed tools and farming equipment scattered about. Axes, pitchforks, a rusty but hefty-looking trap that looked like it could snap a man's leg in half. But also other things, scratches on the stone walls that looked like claw marks, and stains on the floor that were too dark to be anything but blood. "You've fought this thing before," I realized. The woman nodded grimly. "3 times now. It always comes back. Always hungrier. Do you have any weapons?" I asked, though the question felt absurd. What weapon could stand against something like that? "Just what you see," the man replied. "But we've learned a few things. It's smart but not patient. If we can wound it, confuse it, sometimes it retreats. Sometimes..." The pounding upstairs grew louder, more aggressive. I could hear furniture being overturned, glass shattering. The creature was in a frenzy now, and the sound of its movements was wrong. Too fluid, too purposeful for mere animal rage. "All right then," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. "If we're going to make it through the night, we need a plan." For the next few minutes, we hastily assembled a makeshift defense. We set the massive trap near the cellar door, concealing it under a threadbare rug. The children helped gather stones and bottles, anything that could be thrown. The woman armed herself with a pitchfork whose tines gleamed wickedly in the candlelight, while the old man hefted a shovel that looked like it had seen its share of graves. I chose an axe, its handle worn smooth by decades of use. The blade was nicked and stained, but it felt solid in my hands. As I gripped it, I noticed something carved into the wooden handle. Tally marks. Dozens of them. The pounding upstairs suddenly stopped. The silence was worse than the noise had been. In the quiet, I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. The shallow breathing of the children and something else. A soft scraping sound, like claws on stone. "It's found the cellar door," the woman whispered. The scratching continued, deliberate and methodical. Whatever was up there was testing the door, probing for weaknesses. Then came a sound that froze my blood, a low, rumbling chuckle that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. "Ready, everyone?" I whispered, raising the axe. The door exploded inward with a crash that made my ears ring. Splinters of wood showered down as the beast filled the doorway, and up close, it was even more terrifying than I had imagined. The creature was massive, easily 7 feet tall even on all fours, but it was the wrongness of its form that truly paralyzed me with fear. Its body was that of a gigantic wolf, but grotesquely elongated and twisted. Its limbs were too long, ending in hands that were neither human nor animal but something caught between. The fingers were elongated and tipped with claws that gleamed like polished obsidian. Its face was the worst part, the muzzle of a wolf but stretched and distorted, filled with too many teeth that came in too many varieties. Canines like daggers, molars like grinding stones, and in between, needle-sharp fangs that belonged to no earthly creature. Its eyes were pools of molten gold, filled with an intelligence that was unmistakably malevolent. But it was the smell that nearly brought me to my knees. The reek of decay and old blood, mixed with something wild and wrong that made every primitive instinct in my brain scream in terror. The creature took a step forward, its weight making the stone floor crack, and triggered the trap we had set. Metal jaws clamped onto the creature's hind leg with a sound like thunder, causing it to rear back and let out a roar that was part wolf, part something far worse. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, vibrating through the stone walls and into my bones. But instead of the expected cry of pain, the roar carried notes of amusement. "Now," I shouted, my voice barely audible over the creature's noise. We lunged forward as one, a desperate collection of farmers and a lost tourist armed with whatever we could find. The woman struck first, driving her pitchfork deep into the creature's shoulder. But instead of penetrating flesh, the tine struck something that rang like metal. The creature's hide was tougher than leather, and what should have been a killing blow barely drew blood. The old man swung his shovel at the creature's head, but it moved with liquid grace, turning what should have been a devastating blow into a glancing strike. I aimed for its trapped leg, hoping to bring it down, but as my axe descended, the creature caught the handle in one of its two long hands. For a moment, we were locked in a tug-of-war over the weapon, and I found myself staring directly into those golden eyes. Up close, I could see that they weren't simply animal eyes. There was something human in them, something that recognized me as more than just prey. It knew who I was. It remembered me from the forest. The creature's lips pulled back in what was unmistakably a grin, revealing the full horror of its dentition. Then it spoke, its voice a sound like grinding glass mixed with a Highland accent I recognized. "Sebastian Harlow," it said, and my blood turned to ice water. "We've been waiting for you." The voice was wrong in every way possible. Too deep, with undertones that seemed to come from multiple throats. But underneath the monstrosity I could hear something familiar, something that made my mind reel with implications I didn't want to consider. "Alistair," I whispered. The creature's grin widened, and I saw that some of its teeth were gold-capped, just like the man from the pub. Clever boy, though I'm so much more now. The revelation nearly cost me my life. While I stood frozen in horror, the creature wrenched the axe from my grip and backhanded me across the cellar. I flew through the air and crashed into a shelf of preserves, glass jars exploding around me in a shower of pickled vegetables and brine. The children screamed as the creature turned its attention to them, but the woman stepped between them and the monster, wielding her pitchfork like a spear. "You want them, you go through me first." "Oh, I intend to," the creature said, and there was such relish in its voice that I knew it had done this before. Many times. It thrashed against the trap, muscles bulging under its hide, and with a sound like breaking bones it wrenched its leg free. Blood flowed from the wounds, but not the bright red of human blood. This was darker, almost black, and it steamed as it hit the cold stone floor. Free now, the creature moved with terrifying speed. It knocked the old man aside with casual violence, sending him crashing into the wall with a sickening crack. The woman jabbed at it with her pitchfork, but this time the creature caught the weapon in its jaws and bit down. The iron tines snapped like twigs. "Keep at it!" I yelled, struggling to my feet despite the pain lancing through my ribs. Blood ran down my face from where flying glass had cut me, but I forced myself to move. The children were throwing stones and bottles now, anything to distract the monster. Their aim was surprisingly good. One well-aimed bottle hit the beast square in the eye, causing it to stumble and roar in fury. Seizing the moment, I grabbed another tool from the wall, a heavy sledgehammer that took both hands to lift. The creature was shaking its massive head, trying to clear its vision, and I had one chance. I swung the sledgehammer with every ounce of strength I possessed, aiming for the spot where its skull met its neck. The impact sent shockwaves up my arms, and for a moment I thought I had killed it. The creature collapsed to one knee, a sound like a broken bell tolling from its throat. But then it looked up at me, and I saw that its injured eye was already healing, the pupil reforming even as I watched. When it spoke again, its voice held the sound of laughter. "Is that the best you can do, Sebastian?" "I'm disappointed." The others put up more of a fight. "Others?" The word slipped out before I could stop it. "Oh yes. Did you think you were the first?" "We've been calling them for months now. Solo hikers, adventure seekers, people just like you. They all found our little village eventually. They all sat in my pub, ate our special stew." Its grin was horrible. "Some of them are still with us in a way." The implication hit me like a physical blow. The stew, the strange taste, the fragments that had looked like bone. I doubled over and vomited, my stomach rejecting the horror of what I had consumed. The woman took the opportunity to grab a heavy chain from the wall, the sort used for towing vehicles. "Help me!" she cried, wrapping it around the creature's neck while it was distracted by my reaction. I grabbed the other end of the chain, and together we pulled, trying to tighten it around the creature's throat. But its neck was so thick, so muscled, that our efforts seemed futile. The creature thrashed and gurgled, but it was laughing even as we tried to strangle it. "You can't kill us, Sebastian," it gasped between chuckles. "We're so much more than we were. The old ways, the old hungers, they've made us strong, made us whole." "Us?" the woman demanded, pulling harder on the chain. The creature's eyes rolled back, showing only white, but its voice continued, coming from somewhere deeper than its throat. "The whole village, dear woman. We are the pack now. We are the hunt eternal." But the chain was having an effect. The creature's struggles were growing weaker, more desperate. Its golden eyes were beginning to dim, and the wrongness of its proportions seemed to be shifting, becoming more wolf-like and less human. "It's working," the little girl shouted. "Keep pulling!" With a final coordinated effort, we gave the chain one last desperate yank. The creature's eyes widened in what might have been surprise, then slowly closed. Its massive body went limp, the terrible intelligence fading from its features until only the corpse of an enormous wolf remained. We released the chain and stepped back cautiously, all of us breathing hard. The cellar was a wreck, tools scattered, shelves knocked over, the floor slick with spilled preserves and darker stains. But we were alive. "Well," I panted, wiping blood from my face. That was a night to remember. The old man, who had managed to drag himself to a sitting position against the wall, chuckled weakly. "You handle yourself well for a city boy. Thanks. All those years of opening pickle jars really paid off." The little girl, Lily, I remembered, tugged at my sleeve with a small hand. "You promised me a pun." Despite everything, I found myself smiling. Why did the scarecrow win an award? She looked up at me expectantly, her eyes still wide with recent terror but brightening with anticipation. Because he was outstanding in his field. She giggled, a sound like silver bells in the darkness, and for a moment the terror seemed to lift from all of us. It's amazing how laughter can push back the dark, even when the dark has literal teeth. But our relief was short-lived. From somewhere above us came the sound of howling. Not one voice, but many. The pack was calling, and their song carried notes of mourning and rage that made the stone walls seem to tremble. "The village," the woman whispered, her face pale as parchment. If what it said was true, we were far from safe. In fact, our real nightmare was just beginning. As dawn broke over the Highlands, we emerged from the cellar like survivors of a siege, which in many ways we were. The creature's body remained lifeless on the stone floor, but in death it had changed. The grotesque human features had faded, leaving behind what looked like an enormous wolf, but still wrong, still too large, with claws instead of normal paws and teeth that belonged in no natural mouth. "What do we do now?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. The woman, I realized I still didn't know her name, and something told me I shouldn't ask, looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. "We tell the others. Maybe now they'll believe us and take action." But as we climbed the stairs back to the main house, we discovered the true scope of our situation. Every window had been shattered, the furniture overturned and clawed to pieces. Worse yet, scratched into the wooden walls in letters 3 feet high were words that made my blood run cold. "The hunt continues. The pack remembers." And below that, in what looked suspiciously like dried blood, "Sebastian Harlow belongs to us." "They know my name," I whispered. "They all know my name." The old man nodded grimly as he surveyed the damage. Alistair wasn't lying. If the whole village has been changed, then we're in more danger than we thought. "Mind if I tag along?" I asked, though it wasn't really a request. "I think my solo trekking days are over." She gave a small, sad smile. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need." "But Sebastian," she paused, looking back toward the cellar where the creature's body lay. "That thing knew you were coming. It was waiting for you specifically. You need to think about why that might be." Over the next few days, as we barricaded the farmhouse and tried to contact the outside world, I learned the true horror of our situation. The village wasn't just isolated, it was quarantined. The few phone lines that had once connected it to the outside world had been cut weeks ago. The old roads were blocked by construction that never seemed to progress. Even the RAF helicopters that occasionally passed overhead seemed to veer away when they approached our valley. We were trapped with the pack. They decided to give the creature a proper examination. Though proper was a relative term when dealing with something that defied explanation. The body proved to be a twisted amalgamation of human and wolf, but with modifications that spoke of something far worse than natural mutation. Its bones were harder than normal bone, almost metallic. Its teeth showed signs of artificial sharpening. And most disturbing of all, when they opened its stomach, they found personal effects, watches, rings, fragments of clothing that belonged to dozens of missing people. But it was what they found in its brain that truly horrified us. Embedded in the tissue were tiny metallic filaments, forming patterns that looked almost like circuitry. Whatever had happened to the people of this village, it hadn't been entirely natural. As the days passed, we began to piece together the truth. The village had been the site of some kind of experiment, military we suspected, based on the precision of the modifications we found. The locals had been subjected to something that changed them, enhanced them, but at the cost of their humanity. They had become a pack in the truest sense, bound together by hunger and a collective intelligence that transcended individual thought. And they had been calling people like me for months, luring them in with some kind of signal, some compulsion that drew solo travelers off the main paths and into their web. I wasn't the first, and I wouldn't be the last unless we found a way to stop them. News of our situation somehow spread, despite our isolation. Perhaps one of our desperate radio calls had been heard, or maybe someone had noticed the pattern of disappearances. Researchers arrived, or tried to arrive. Most were turned back by the construction barriers, but a few made it through. They speculated on the creatures' origins, debating whether they were the result of some kind of virus, environmental contamination, or deliberate genetic modification. The official story, when it finally emerged, was carefully sanitized. A pack of unusually large wolves had been responsible for several deaths in the region. The village had been evacuated for safety reasons, and the area was closed to civilian access. The researchers published papers about environmental adaptation in remote ecosystems and unusual behavioral patterns in stressed wildlife populations. They even named the species Lupus harlowensis, after me, apparently. Not exactly the legacy I'd expected, but I supposed it was better than becoming dinner for the pack. As for me, I found myself oddly attached to the strange little group of survivors. Maybe it was the sense of community forged in terror, or perhaps facing death with strangers really does create a unique bond. The woman, the old man, little Lily, and her brother, we had become a family of sorts, bound together by shared nightmare and mutual dependence. One afternoon, as I sat watching the blocked road that led away from our valley, the old man approached me. I had learned his name was Harold, and he had lived in these highlands his entire life. "Heard you had quite the adventure," he said, settling beside me on the porch. "You could say that," I replied, "though next time a heads up would be nice." He chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "Would you have believed us?" "Fair point." I paused, watching the sun set behind the hills that had become our prison. "How long do you think we'll be stuck here?" "Until they decide we're no longer useful," he said quietly. "Or until we find a way to destroy the rest of the pack." That night, as I lay in the small bedroom they had given me, I listened to the sounds outside. The howling had become a nightly occurrence, though it came from farther away now. The pack was being cautious, learning from their loss, but I could hear something else in their calls, a note of mourning, perhaps, or rage. They had lost one of their own, and they hadn't forgotten who was responsible. Sometimes, in the darkest hours before dawn, I would hear something else entirely. A voice carried on the wind, speaking my name with the accent of the Highlands. Alistair, or what had once been Alistair, calling to me from somewhere in the darkness. Reminding me that I belonged to them now, that I was part of their story whether I wanted to be or not. I never told the others about these moments. How could I explain that the creature we had killed might not be as dead as we hoped? That sometimes when the moon was full and the wind was just right, I could feel something calling to me from the depths of the forest? A hunger that wasn't entirely my own, a restlessness that seemed to pull me toward the tree line. The official researchers who had managed to reach us eventually packed up and left, taking their samples and their theories with them. They promised that help would come, that the area would be contained and neutralized. But weeks passed, then months, and the barriers remained. The roads stayed blocked. The phones stayed dead. We were still prisoners in paradise, sharing our valley with things that had once been human but were now something far worse. And sometimes, late at night when the howling grew loud enough to shake the windows, I wondered if we were really survivors at all, or if we were just the next phase of the experiment. The pack was patient after all. They had time, and they knew exactly where to find us when they were ready. But for now, as I write this account by candlelight, the power grid was another casualty of our situation. I cling to one small comfort. We had fought monsters and won, We had looked into the abyss and lived to tell about it, even if no one would ever believe us, even if we might not live long enough for it to matter. The howling has started again, closer this time. I can hear Lily crying in the next room and Harold checking the locks on the doors. Tomorrow we'll reinforce the barricades again, check our weapons, and prepare for another night of siege. Because that's what survivors do. We endure, we adapt, we fight. Even when we're not entirely sure we're still human. The pack remembers, after all. And so do we.